Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the What If guy, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Issei was grandson of Zeus? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. It'll be alright, go on ahead. Daddy and I will be right near you. A pretty woman with brown hair and warm brown eyes encouraged her son to go play with some of the kids. She lowered down to look at her child, who also had brown hair and soft innocent brown eyes. Issei Hyoudou hid nervously behind his mother, clutching her pants leg in shyness. He lowered his head to avoid detection from the people in the park. Hiromi Hyoudou crouched down and looked at her son with warm affection. Sweetie, don't be shy. I'm sure the other kids would like to play with you. Issei looked up at his mother, and then he looked past her to see the kids enjoying themselves. With his mother's encouragement, the young tot slowly walked over to the crowd of kids. Pausing in his pace, Issei looked back at his mother, who gave him a warm smile and nodded to him. Looking back in front of him, Issei continued his pace. Hiromi smiled as she walked back to the park bench, sitting with a man with slightly spiky brown hair and brown eyes covered by glasses with square lenses. Mr. Hyoudou chuckled and crossed his arms as he watched his son attempt to interact with the kids. He looked over to his wife, and his chuckling faded. Something wrong, honey? Hiromi looked over to her husband and she gave him a small smile. It's nothing. It's just that our dear Issei. He's growing stronger. I don't know how or why, but he's growing far more powerful than I would have liked. Mr. Hyoudou adopted a serious look on his face, and he sighed. Honey, you knew it would come to T-dash. I know I did. Mr. Hyoudou widened his eyes at his wife's outburst. Hiromi's eyes were widened with anxiety, and then her eyes softened as she calmed herself. I'm sorry, honey. Mr. Hyoudou put his hand on his wife's shoulder, and he caressed it in reassurance. I know it may seem bad, but you don't need to worry about Issei. He's going to be fine. Hiromi sighed and smiled as she felt her husband's hand upon her. She looked over to see her son looking nervously at the amount of kids near him. It's just that the reason he is this way is because of me. Now don't say it like that, Hiromi. Granted, your physiology is much different from mine, but that doesn't mean Issei can't have a normal childhood. The signs have already been showing. But that's what I get for being a daughter of Zeus. Indeed, Hiromi Hyoudou was a daughter of Zeus, the king of the Olympian gods. Originally residing in Mount Olympus, when she reached of age, she traveled away in order to stay in the human world. As she stayed, she had met Mr. Hyoudou. The two married sometime later, with Hiromi shortly revealing her status as a goddess of Olympus. Mr. Hyoudou, who was previously fascinated with the concept of Greek mythology, was surprisingly not shocked at all by Hiromi's revelation. As time went on, the Hyoudou couple bore a son by the name of Issei. Does Zeus even know that he has a grandson? Mr. Hyoudou asked. Hiromi nodded her head in response. He should. He can sense all of his children and the rest of his descendants. But it's not in his nature to actually track his family down. Mr. Hyoudou rose an eyebrow, and then he sighed, looking over at his son. Hiromi looked over as well, and she crossed her arms. He's so. Mr. Hyoudou looked over to his wife. He's extraordinary. To be honest, I think it's great that he will have a less than normal life. It might help him experience different things. Hiromi sighed. With my blood, and one of the Longinus in him, he's going to have a strange life. I just don't want him to get hurt. Mr. Hyoudou looked at his wife for a moment, and then he sighed. The Hyoudou's house. I'm so proud of you, honey. You actually played with some of the kids today. Did you have fun? Cooed Hiromi as she petted her son's head gently. Issei, now tucked in his bed, looked up at his mother and nodded silently. Hiromi smiled warmly and pecked her son with a kiss on his forehead. Sweet dreams, Issei. She walked away from her son's bed, turned his room light off, and closed the door, leaving it slightly open as a habit. Hearing his mother walk out of his room, Issei moved around in his bed and looked up at the ceiling. Closing his brown eyes slowly, Issei relaxed into a peaceful sleep. In Issei's mind, Issei opened his eyes and he looked around, not knowing where he was. He seemed to be in a completely black area. He adopted a nervous look on his face, and he looked down at the spaceless ground. "Ah, you're finally here." Issei jumped and his body started to shake. Ha. I never would have expected to meet you in here so early. Seems like your growth rate in terms of power has allowed me to contact you. Issei took a step back as he looked up to see a large red Welsh dragon with green eyes. The child's eyes widened, and he backed away from the amused dragon. It seems that my host is not much of a talker. Then again, you are extremely young. It is strange that I was able to contact you so early. The dragon rose its head at his new host, who looked up at him with an expression of fear. Rolling his green eyes, the Welsh dragon attempted to placate his host. "Relax, child. I have no intention of harming you. After all, why would I?" Outside of Issei's mind, Hiromi widened her eyes as she detected a huge surge of power within her son, and she quickly sprinted out of her room and ran into Issei's room. Her brown eyes widened in shock as she saw a crimson aura enveloping her son. Her eyes widened further. As she derived from Olympian heritage, Hiromi was aware of the gods and Buddhas, angels, fallen angels, devils, and more importantly, the dragons. She knew about the heavenly dragons, Great Red, and Ophis the Ouroboros dragon. The heavenly dragons were sealed into sacred gears, and Great Red and supposedly Ophis remained in the dimensional gap. According to what she heard from Mount Olympus, Drake had the shape of a red Welsh dragon, and the color of the aura enveloping Issei was red. Oh my goodness! So that means Drake was sealed in the Longinus within Issei. In Issei's mind. Who are you? The little Issei asked. Now you finally talk. The Welsh dragon suddenly looked up, and he tilted his head. Hold on, kid. Outside of Issei's mind. Daughter of Zeus. Hiromi widened her eyes, and looked around her son's room. Where had that voice come from? So you can hear me. Hiromi's eyes widened further. Is this Drake? You are correct. It seems that your son's power has finally increased to the point that I have been able to awaken and contact him. Hiromi blinked and then she sighed. Yes, it's true. He's strong, very strong. But it is to be expected as the grandson of Zeus. Your son has a great potential, Hiromi. Hiromi frowned softly and sat on her son's bed. She reached and softly petted Issei's head. After leaving Mount Olympus, I just wanted to have a normal life and settle down. I had thought that when Issei was born, his human blood would cancel out my blood. But clearly it didn't work out as I had hoped. Daughter of Zeus, when Issei grows, he will not have a choice in the future of encountering the supernatural. There will be more to come, and the way he is now, despite his tremendously vast level of power, he will have a hard time as he dwells in the world of the supernatural. Hiromi's frown morphed into a saddened look of worry. I just don't want him to get hurt. I offer my sympathy. I also do not wish to put my host in any harm. That is why I am speaking with you now. With my power in his disposal, I will be able to help your son. However, my power will not be enough to help him survive. He will need the assistance of someone other than myself. The daughter of Zeus put her hands on her face, sighing deeply. Removing her hands, she looked at her son worriedly. He's so innocent. Innocence is a virtue. For him to be exposed to the world of the supernatural, I don't know what will happen to his personality. I don't want to lose my son. Tears started to fall from her eyes, and she reached for Issei, hugging him tightly. I can't lose him. More tears started to fall down from her eyes. Drake remained quiet in respect, and after a short while, Hiromi quieted her crying, while still holding on to her son. You will not lose him, daughter of Zeus. He still has an opportunity to protect himself. Hiromi closed her eyes and sighed, her eyes growing wet with more tears as she looked at her sleeping son. My precious son. Mount Olympus. Mommy? Asked Issei. Hold on, sweetie, mommy has to concentrate. Hiromi told her son. Hiromi narrowed her eyes as she looked around her surroundings. In front of her stood a vast palace on top of a mountain with crashing waves. Above the large palace was the gray and golden-colored sky. Issei looked up nervously at the sky and the palace. Hiromi sighed as she walked Issei inside the palace. Issei looked up in awe at the amount of crystal mansions. Hiromi looked around nostalgically. She remembered that she used to live here. Walking in front of a gigantic door, Hiromi pushed the door open, revealing an elderly man, albeit with a great muscular physique. His eyes were pure white, and he was dressed in a white toga with golden arm guards. Hiromi sighed again as she walked forward to the man, and she stopped in front of him. Issei looked up at the unfamiliar man. The man smiled as he peered at Hiromi. Well, if it isn't my lovely daughter. Hiromi lowered her head as she looked up at the man. Hello, father. Zeus, the king of the Olympian gods, smiled as he looked at the young boy next to Hiromi. Who is this little fella? Hiromi looked down at her son, who gripped her pants leg. She patted his head gently and looked back up at Zeus. This is my son Issei, father. Your grandson. Zeus widened his eyes. Oh, is that so? And why have you brought him here? You've made yourself clear that you wish to stay in the human world. So why have you brought my grandson to Mount Olympus? Hiromi gulped and she sighed once more. It only took a couple of minutes, but Hiromi was able to explain the situation to her father about Issei. Zeus nodded his head as he listened to his daughter's explanation, all the while shifting his wise eyes to his grandson. That I see. Getting up from his throne, Zeus walked over to his grandson, who backed away slightly as he stood close to his mother. Zeus smiled warmly. There is no need to be afraid, Issei. I'm your grandfather, Zeus. I must say, for such a little tot, you have a tremendous amount of power within you. Perhaps even greater once you learn how to train it. Issei hesitantly looked up at his grandfather, and then he looked up at his mother, who gave him a warm but sad smile. It'll be all right, sweetie. Your grandfather's going to help you. 12 years later, at the training center of Mount Olympus. A young man with brown hair, soft yet firm brown eyes, and a muscular and toned physique, quickly dodged a bolt of lightning from Zeus, the ruler of Mount Olympus. On the young man's left arm was a red, claw-shaped gauntlet with yellow accents and green inscriptions. Partner, perhaps it is time to use the improved form of your balance breaker. The young man narrowed his eyes as he listened to the Welsh dragon sealed in his sacred gear, also known as the boosted gear. Sounds like a plan. The young man lifted his arm up. Welsh dragon over booster. Welsh dragon balance breaker. A crimson aura enveloped the young man, with a dragon armor manifesting and clasping onto his body. The green jewels embedded within the armor glowed, as the power of the young man increased greatly. Zeus smirked at the young man, and he charged a bolt of lightning that was much larger and far more powerful than the one before. So you're resorting to your scale mail, huh? Very well, come at me, my grandson. 2 hours later, Issei Hyoudou narrowed his eyes as he faced his opponent. He stood in a battle position, with his sacred gear unseen, sealed within his body. A vigorous, fire-breathing monster that had the frontal body of a lion, horns of a goat, and the tail of a serpent, growled deeply at him. Moving slowly on all fours, the creature rapidly whipped its tail over to Issei, who dodged it by jumping over it just in time. Landing on the ground, Issei quickly grabbed the creature's tail, and using the creature's weight to his advantage, he swung the creature around. He let go, causing the creature to soar throughout the area, crashing into the wall. The creature quickly got up, shook its head, and charged towards Issei. It lowered its head, intending to puncture Issei with its horns. The young man thought quickly and grabbed the creature's horns, gripping his hold tightly. With little effort, Issei pulled the horns off of the creature, causing it to squeal out in pain and anguish. Recovering from its pain, the creature growled and breathed out a massive wave of fire. Issei narrowed his eyes, and he charged towards the creature, going through the vast waves of fires. As he got closer, Issei lifted his hands, holding the horns of the creature. Within seconds, he got closer to the creature, and with a swipe of his hands, Issei impaled the creature's head with its own horns. Hearing the last squealing cries of the creature, Issei walked away from it, looking at his hands, which were covered in the creature's blood. His firm eyes gained almost a saddened look, and then he continued his pace. 1 hour later, Issei looked around his surroundings, focused on trying to sense his enemy. Closing his eyes, he concentrated without interruption. Suddenly, a shadow formed under him, and Issei opened his eyes and jumped away just in time to avoid an explosion from the ground. Immediately settling himself into a battle stance, Issei looked up to see a eyeless figure with decaying flesh and bladed arms. Under its waist was a cloud of black smoke. The ghost-like creature moved to strike Issei with its bladed arms. Issei quickly maneuvered out of the way and stomped on the blades, trapping them into the ground. As the creature struggled to free itself, Issei reared his fist back and sent the creature up into the air with a powerful uppercut. Jumping up into the air, Issei grabbed the creature by its head and slammed it onto the ground, bashing its head into the cracks repeatedly. The young man then grabbed one of the creature's bladed arms, and with a quick slash, he decapitated the creature, ending its existence. Staring at the creature for a moment, Issei lifted his hand, charging a sapphire sphere of energy. Looking away with his eyes closed, he shot it at the creature, destroying every trace of its existence. Looking around the training area, Issei looked up at the ceiling and sighed. I wonder if Uncle Hephaestus is finished yet? Agora of Athens. Well, if isn't my nephew. I'm almost done with your gift, so just wait for a moment. Issei nodded as he watched his uncle craft a new artifact for him. Over time, Issei had been training with his grandfather and the monstrous creatures of Mount Olympus. As Issei grew, so did his power. Zeus himself had stated that Issei's power was still fluctuating. Even by a demigod standards, Issei's power was absolutely monstrous, and it still continued to grow. Despite his immense power, Issei did not have a bellicose or aggressive personality. Outside of battle, Issei maintained the personality of a benevolent, kind, yet shy young man. When he participated in battle, however, Issei was extremely serious, preferring not to waste time and to just finish the clash as soon as possible. His grandfather told him that he could enjoy a better fight if he held back his power, in order to prolong it further. Issei was hesitant about his grandfather's advice, and so he suppressed the thought. As he trained with his grandfather, Issei had also come to friendly terms with the heavenly Welsh dragon known as Draig. Over time, Draig had helped Issei become familiar with the topics of the supernatural, such as angels, fallen angels, devils, and dragons. According to the Welsh dragon, dragons were beings created by huge masses of energy and acted freely selfishly. In the past, Draig had a rival by the name of Albion, the vanishing dragon. However, their rivalry was interrupted by the three factions. Later on, the bodies of Draig and Albion were destroyed and placed into two separate sacred gears. Issei, it's ready. Shaking himself out of his thoughts, Issei looked up at his uncle. His eyes widened at the sight of his new artifact. A blade held a design featuring a devil-like horn shape and a pattern of golden stripes on the surface of the blade. Hephaestus lowered his hand containing the blade and handed it to Issei. Grabbing the blade from his uncle, Issei peered at the new artifact and traced his finger onto the blade. 1 hour later, training center. A cyclops-like creature with undead characteristics growled menacingly as it walked towards Issei. Issei, holding his new weapon, looked into the eye of the cyclops. With a roar, the cyclops charged towards Issei, and the young man avoided the cyclops' attempt to attack him, and he embedded his blade within it. Embedding his blade deeper, Issei concentrated his power, and the blade suddenly emitted a vast pool of fire before the cyclops combusted from the immense pressure. Releasing his blade from the creature, Issei jumped off of the cyclops, walking away as it disintegrated from the fire. In Zeus's domain. A high school. Issei blinked as he stood in front of his grandfather. After he was done training, his grandfather had called him in order to discuss something important with him. Zeus nodded and sighed in response to his grandson. Indeed. To be honest, Issei, your power has already increased greatly, so the training you endured has paid off. Your mother wishes for you to attend school. I, for one, don't really mind it. What do you think? Issei looked down as he considered his options. His mother did want him to meet new people, and it would help him be more sociable. But I guess it can't be too bad. It's gonna take some time for me to get used to the new experience. Relax, partner. Besides, anyone who possesses the power of dragons is a chick magnet, especially in your case, since you just so happen to be a demigod as well. You'll survive. Issei widened his eyes as a light blush formed on his face. That doesn't exactly reassure me, Drake. Oh, lighten up, kid. You can destroy many monsters with little to no effort, and yet you get nervous about the subject about young women. No offense, but you, my host, are what mortals would call a socially awkward hero. Issei frowned softly at the name given to him by Drake. Kuo Academy. Issei stood at the gates in front of his new school, praising the appearance of it. As he looked around his surroundings, he noticed a large crowd of students occupying the school grounds. He looked up at the sky and he sighed. Something troubling you, partner? There's a lot of devils residing in this school. I don't want to put too much attention to myself. Interesting. Humph, that does seem to be a pet peeve of yours. Having attention all on you. So are you going to reveal your power or not? Issei closed his eyes as he suppressed his power, so that he would calm himself. Like I said, I don't want too much attention. I don't really have any prejudice against any angels, devils, or fallen angels. I just once I want to have some normalcy in my life. Humph, whatever you think is best, my host. Just so you know, you alone are abnormal. The aspects of the supernatural will catch up to you eventually. Issei lowered his head, and he sighed, rubbing the back of his head, a habit he had gained a while back. He looked up at the gates and sighed once more. I know. I guess I will just have to put up with it. The school bell rang, indicating that class was now over. Issei sighed as he picked his bag up, looking around the classroom. Sighing again, he walked out of the classroom and into the hallways. As he walked ahead, he noticed some of the girls of Kuo Academy shooting him some glances. Very suggestive glances. He lowered his head and looked ahead, feeling a little uncomfortable at the glances he was receiving. Partner, calm yourself. They're just girls. Mortal girls, no less. I know, Drake. I'm just not used to being the one stared at. For a powerful being, you sure are modest and introverted. The young man sighed as he rubbed the back of his head in habit. Walking outside of Kuo Academy, Issei stopped near some nearby trees. Sitting down onto the ground, Issei crossed his legs as he watched the students walk away from the school. Tilting his head, Issei laid against the tree into a relaxing position. The day wasn't bad at all. Don't you agree? Issei adopted a thoughtful look on his face as he looked up at the sky. I guess. Although I can't help but get the strange feeling that someone was watching me all day. It's kind of unsettling. Someone, or something. Let me rephrase that. I think some of the devils in the school were actually watching me today. But that I don't know why. I made sure to suppress my power so I would remain undetected. Hate to tell you this, kid, but because you're a demigod, you have a desirable scent. And that it's able to tract. After hearing that, Issei sighed and crossed his arms. Well, so much for normalcy. I just hope dash. So, you are my new kohai. Oh, find me in the Alps. What? Sorry, it was something I watched earlier on. Issei looked up to see a beautiful buxom woman with long crimson hair and blue-green eyes. She was dressed in the Kuo Academy girls' school uniform. Issei started to feel a sense of nervousness as he detected something strange in the girl's eyes. The young man didn't want to know what that look in the girl's eyes signified. The girl gave Issei a warm smile as she crouched down to him. Issei Hyoudou-kun. It's nice to meet you. Issei looked at the girl and he lowered his head slightly. It's nice to meet you too. The girl smiled wider. My name is Rias Gremry. Was your first time here enjoyable? Issei looked down again. Might as well answer her, partner. Devil or not, she doesn't seem to be hostile. Then again, if she were to harm you, it'd be pointless on her attempt anyway. Listening to the Welsh dragon, Issei looked up at the crimson-haired devil and nodded. It was okay. I can't complain. The two remained quiet until Rias spoke up. I was wondering if you would come with me, perhaps somewhere more quieter? Issei blinked and he tilted his head. I don't know. Is it really that important? I don't mean to sound rude, but... Rias's smile grew warmer. Such a sweet boy. The Occult Research Club. Issei widened his eyes as Rias walked him towards the Victorian-styled building. Opening the door, Rias and Issei walked inside, and the former closed the door behind them. Watching Rias walk away from the door, Issei widened his eyes further as he saw 3 more students occupying the room. A buxom beauty with black hair tied in a ponytail and violet eyes looked over at Issei, and she smiled at him. "Come and sit down, Atun." Issei looked over to Rias, who directed her hand toward a couch. Issei looked around the room and complied, sitting down onto the couch. Rias smiled as she sat down across from him and crossed her arms. "You're probably wondering why I called you here." Issei blinked and rubbed the back of his head. "Yeah, a little bit." Rias chuckled, and then she set her face into a mysterious smile. "Your scent is very strong, Issei-kun. I could smell it all the way from inside the school." Issei widened his eyes. "Is my scent really that powerful?" "Unfortunately or fortunately, whichever works. Since you are aware that you are a demigod, and the fact that you are a grandson of Zeus, who is known as a very powerful Olympian god, your scent is extremely strong. So that's how they were able to find me directly. You sure can't catch a break, can you, partner? So then you already know." Rias smiled wider. "That's right. Although your lineage is something I'm not aware of." She straightened her positon in her seat. "As I've said before, my name is Rias Gremory. I'm an heiress of the Gremory clan." She directed her hand behind herself. "These students are a part of my peerage." She pointed to the black-haired girl with violet eyes. "This is my queen, Akino Himejima." Akino's smile grew warmer as she waved at Issei. The young man's face flushed in response. Rias then pointed to a young man with blonde hair and gray eyes. "This is my knight, Yuto Kiba." Yuto lifted his hand up and waved it towards Issei. "And this is my rook, Kaneko Tuju." Rias pointed to a petite girl with white hair and hazel eyes, who nodded silently to Issei. Issei nodded quietly and looked around the room. Rias giggled as she looked at her newfound kohai. "You look so nervous, Ain." Issei rubbed the back of his head. "It's nothing to do with you guys. It's just that I'm not usually the type of person to meet new people." Rias smiled wider and nodded as she understood Issei's words. Although, that scent of his was absolutely irresistible to her. "The Gremory Devil is giving you a strange look, partner. Might want to guard yourself." Rias narrowed her eyes as she stared at Issei, and her gaze became serious. "Yuto. Kaneko." "Yes, Bucho." "Understood." Yuto narrowed his eyes as he placed his hand on the ground, and a number of swords manifested and shot towards Issei. Issei widened his eyes at the motion, but he remained still. The swords shot towards Issei, but suddenly, as soon as they came in contact with the young man, they shattered into nothingness. Yuto widened his eyes in surprise at the scene he had just witnessed. Behind him, Kaneko shot forward, landing a punch to the still shocked Issei. The room of the Occult Research Club was completely silent. Issei remained where he was, blinking as he noticed Kaneko with her fist planted on his stomach. The white-haired girl widened her eyes as she felt a sudden pain in her arm, and she retracted herself from Issei, who continued to sit on the couch in silence. Rias's eyes widened slightly, not showing surprise, yet showing a bit of interest. He didn't even attempt to defend himself, and yet Yuto's sacred gear and Kankyo's strength didn't even faze him. Issei blinked repeatedly in confusion and rubbed the back of his head. "I'm so lost right now." "Try to release some of your power. Not all of it, but some of it." "Why?" "Just do it, partner." Complying with the Welsh dragon's orders, Issei closed his eyes and released only a small measure of his power. Immediately after, Yuto and Kaneko fell to their knees, and Rias and Akino both widened their eyes in amazement. Rias felt her legs going a bit numb. His aura of power. It's almost frightening. I don't know if I should be assuming this, but the level of power he's showing, it's almost close to that of an ultimate class devil. And yet he's still a child. Issei relaxed and opened his eyes, restraining his power once more. Rias sighed as she felt the heavy pressure disappearing from the area. She definitely had to tell Sona about their new kohai. Relaxing into a more comfortable position, Ria smiled and composed herself as she spoke up. Unai dash. Knock knock. The crimson-haired devil widened her eyes as she looked over to the door. Come in. The door opened, revealing a new crowd of students. Issei widened his eyes as he sensed the energy of the newcomers. So many devils. Ria smiled as she looked at the girl with black hair styled in a bob cut and violet eyes covered by red glasses. Behind her was a girl with knee-length black hair styled with split bangs and light brown eyes covered by blue, semi-rimmed glasses with square lenses. Behind her were several other students. Sona, what brings you here? The girl with the bob-cut hairstyle smiled at her friend. I sense something peculiar in this room. I also detected the very same scent I could smell earlier on today in the school. And I believe I found it. She set her violet eyes towards Issei, who blinked in confusion. You seem to attract a whole number of devils, partner. Specifically, the women. Humph, he doesn't look like anything special to me. Issei turned to look at a young man with short blonde hair and gray eyes, who shot him an arrogant glance. The blonde-haired young man looked up at Rias. Rias, don't tell me you've already turned the new guy into a devil. Rias gave the young man an unreadable look, until Sona turned to face him. Now Saji, don't be rude and assume things. Sona set her eyes to Issei. Issei Hyoudou, how do you do? My name is Sona Citri. The girl with blue, semi-rimmed glasses walked up and introduced herself next. My name is Tsubaki Shinra. Then a white-haired girl with blue-green eyes introduced herself. Momo Hanakai. Next was a slim girl with long brown hair that ended in 2 short braids and matching eyes. Raya Kasuka. A girl with shoulder-length reddish-brown hair and brown eyes walked up and smiled. Nice to meet you. I'm Tomo Meguri. A girl with blue, shoulder-length hair and matching blue eyes, along with a Bishonen face, put her hand on her chest. Tsubasa Yura. Lastly, a short petite girl with brown hair in twin ponytails and green eyes walked forward. Ruruko Numura. Sona smiled as the last member of her peerage was introduced. She looked over to Issei, who blinked at the amount of devils in the room. There's so many people here. Rias giggled and she looked over to Issei. There's something I want to ask you. Issei turned to look at her and blinked. Rias smiled. Do you know what the evil pieces are? Issei widened his eyes at the familiar topic. When he was younger, both Zeus and Drake had informed him that the evil pieces were created by Ajuka Beelzebub, one of the 4 great Satans. Because of the devastating Great War between the 3 factions, which had also caused the countless lives of devils. It was based on chess, with the total being 15 pieces. There was 1 queen, 2 rooks, 2 bishops, 2 knights, and 8 pawns. Issei lowered his head as he had the feeling he knew what Rias was going to ask him. And to be honest, he had no intention of joining any peerages. He was already abnormal to begin with, and he really had no desire to become a devil. Plus the fact that he had just met Rias and the rest of the devils not too long ago. He had just met them for Pete's sake. Not that he had any prejudice against any of the devils. He just had no desire to involve himself into a peerage. Issei looked up at the crimson-haired devil, and he sighed. I do, Gremory-senpai. But I know what you're going to ask me. And although I'm a little surprised that you would ask me at all, I just have to say this. I don't want to join your peerage. Rias, Sona, and their peerages widened their eyes a little. Issei lowered his head again. It's nothing to do with you, Gremory-senpai, or Himejima-senpai, Kaneko-san, and Yudo-san. He looked at Sona and her peerage. And neither you, Citri-senpai, Shinra-senpai, and the rest of the peerage. It's just that I'm already something that's unusual. Becoming a devil would just change me once again. Rias looked at her Kohai, and then she sighed. And here I was so close to getting a powerful ally for myself. Although I have to respect my Kohai's decision. He won't join my peerage, but I do get to see him at school. Smiling warmly, Rias placed her hand on her chest. I respect your decision, Issei-kun. Issei nodded his head, and he got up from his seat. As he walked towards the club door, he turned back around to face Rias, Sona, and their peerages. It was nice meeting you all. We'll see each other in school. Opening the door, Issei exited out of the occult research club. Rias put her hand on her cheek as she pondered, and then she smiled. Well, his reasons were valid. Perhaps I had rushed a bit. I'll be watching him while he attends here. He may be able to suppress his power, but that scent of his. She gained a glazed look in her eyes. With that scent of his, it won't be hard to find him. Aquino stared at the door, and a smile grew onto her face. Such a shame, he's such a cute young boy. I would have loved to spoil him. But he can't hide that easily. That scent of his does overwhelming. A small blush formed on Aquino's face as she giggled softly. Tsubaki sniffed slightly as she tried to detect the remaining scent of Issei, and a light blush brightened onto her face. She narrowed her light brown eyes as she tried to force her blush down. Of Kuo Academy. Issei Hyoudou? You're from Kuo Academy, right? Issei sighed inwardly as he stopped in his pace. He hadn't even made 3 steps onto the bridge, and yet another presence was calling for him. He turned around to see a girl with black hair and violet eyes, dressed in a much different uniform from the ones the girls wore from his new school. Issei tilted his head at the girl, and then his eyes widened as he detected her energy. Fallen angel? What is she doing here? Did she detect my scent too? It's not exactly impossible, partner. Why, yeah, I just enrolled into this school. Why, did you need anything? The girl smiled as she walked closer to Issei. Yes, there is something I wanted to ask you. As soon as she got closer to Issei, a glazed look appeared in her eyes, and her legs started to shake. Issei widened his eyes, and he took a step back. The girl shortly recovered and she gained her composure. Sorry about that. I guess I'm a little woozy. I just wanted to ask you, would you go out on a date with me? Issei widened his eyes once again, and he rubbed the back of his head. This fallen angel barely knows me. Humph, don't be so naive, partner. She's planning something. Keep your guard up. Issei settled himself, and he straightened his stance. Sorry, but I'm not really looking to date anyone. I don't really know you either. I'm sorry. He turned to walk away until the girl walked closer over to him. No, wait. Please hold O-dash. She cut herself off as her eyes glazed over once again. Issei widened his eyes and he gained an almost nervous look. Gosh, is my scent really that strong? She's stumbling over her words by just sniffling your scent. Remember, kid, fallen angels are known for having impure thoughts. That's kind of disturbing, Drake. Only you would find it disturbing, partner. Issei looked up at the girl to see her violet eyes still glazed, her speech almost diminishing to mumbling. Getting a little uncomfortable and a little bit creeped out, Issei backed away. Sparks of pure lightning surrounded his body, and Issei warped away, his body disappearing away. Losing track of the enticing scent, the girl recovered once more, and her violet eyes widened, before narrowing darkly. Curse him and that delicious scent of his. I'll just have to try again next time. Issei's house. Issei sighed as he walked into his room. He dropped his bag onto his bed and sat down. Looking up at the ceiling, Issei laid himself down, placing his hands behind his head. His eyes gained a saddened look, and he closed them, ready to go into a peaceful nap. Humph, you've only been to that institution of yours for a day, and yet you've already acquired the attention of some of the female devils. Kukukuku. You sure are an interesting host, Issei Hyoudou. The next morning, the light from the sun shone through the window, its brightness shining onto Issei's face. His eyes opening slightly, Issei rubbed his face, and he reached for his alarm clock so he could check the time, until he felt something soft. Fleshy even. Brown eyes shot wide open in shock, and Issei immediately shot out of his bed. His eyes widened when he saw who was in his bed. No. What he saw was the familiar crimson-red hair, the rather large bust, and the voluptuous curves covered by the bed covers. Issei recognized this girl immediately, and he wouldn't have been so anxious had it not been the fact that the girl in bed was naked. That's right, Rias Gremory was naked. In his bed. And she was sleeping peacefully as though she was completely relaxed. Issei backed away slowly, unable to believe what he was seeing. Why is Gremory-senpai in my house? As much as he wanted to know why, Issei didn't really want to wake the crimson-haired devil up. He had no idea why Rias was in his house, and in his room, sleeping naked in his bed. He was glad that she hadn't woken up yet. Gulping nervously, Issei went to the bathroom to change into his day clothes. Walking out of the bathroom, Issei paused in his pace when he saw Rias move about in his bed. The crimson-haired devil opened her blue-green eyes and lifted her body up, relaxing into a comfortable position. She emitted a soft yawn and blinked several times, and looked at the still uneasy Issei, smiling at the look on his face. "Good morning, Hyun." Issei didn't reply. He merely maintained his confused yet puzzled gaze. Not knowing how to handle this situation, Issei rubbed the back of his head in habit. Sighing, Issei quickly removed his eyes from Rias's body, looking at the wall. "What are you doing here, Gremry-senpai?" Rias giggled and sat up on Issei's bed. "I just came to check up on my new kohai." Issei widened his eyes. "Check up on me? But why are you naked?" "Actually, let me rephrase that. How did you even find out where I live?" Rias smiled and crossed her legs. Issei then widened his eyes and palmed his face. "My scent." "Of course. Dumb question. Speaking of scents, I need to talk to Grandpa about that. He might know what's going on." Rias giggled and tilted her head. "I don't mind it if you look at me, Issei. You don't have to be so nervous." Issei shook his head and maintained his staring at the wall. "I'm not that type of person, Gremry-senpai." Rias narrowed her eyes but smiled as she got off of the bed. She walked over to Issei, placing her hand on his cheek. "Such a modest boy." She chuckled and pet his cheek, and went to pick up her clothes off the floor. Issei kept his gaze on the wall, and crossed his arms. "Humph, you do know any man in your situation would have jumped in excitement at the sight of a naked woman." Clasping her bra on, Rias turned around to face Issei, who was still facing the wall. Smiling warmly, Rias put the rest of her uniform on, and tilted her head. "He's so innocent. He sure is adamant to avoid looking at me." You can look now, Issei-kun." Hesitating, Issei turned around, and his stance relaxed as he saw that Rias wasn't lying to him. Rias smiled wider and walked over to him. "What were you planning on doing today?" Issei widened his eyes and looked at his calendar on the wall. "Saturday." He sighed and lowered his head. "Which means no school today. I need to talk to Grandpa Zeus about this whole scent nonsense. The fallen angel from yesterday kept mumbling, and to be honest, that IT kind of creeped me out. But I don't want Gremry-senpai to follow me around." He looked up at the smiling Rias. "I'm visiting a few relatives today. I haven't seen them for a while, so I might be with them all day." Rias widened her eyes a little. She was hoping she could find out more about her new kohai. But she would always find the opportunity to go see him whenever he was at school anyway. Plus she knew where he lived, so that was a bonus for her. She didn't want to bother him more. "All right, Issei-kun. Enjoy yourself." Nodding cautiously to the crimson-haired devil, Issei went to reach for his room door, until his eyes widened as he remembered something. He turned to look at Rias. "Gremry-senpai, you never really answered my question. Why were you naked in my bed?" Rias gave Issei a mysterious smile, and then she chuckled, crossing her arms in amusement. "It's much more comfortable for me to sleep naked, and plus." Her blue-green eyes gained the familiar glazed look as she set her sights on Issei. "You're much more warm and cuddly than just a plain old bed." Issei's eyes widened as his face flushed, and he gulped down a nervous lump in his throat. Rias giggled when she saw her kohai rush out of his room. The crimson-haired devil smiled in amusement, and looked out of the window to see Issei running off somewhere. Such a special kohai. Mount Olympus. "So, what exactly is your question, my grandson?" Issei sighed as he and his grandfather walked across from each other. He wasn't exactly lying to Rias when he told her that he was visiting some relatives. He just didn't tell her who he was visiting. As they walked across the hallways, Issei noticed the amount of Olympians mingling about. The young man rubbed the back of his head and looked up at his grandfather. "What is this scent I keep hearing about? When I came to Kuo Academy, the devils residing there were able to track me down without any trouble, even though I suppressed my power." Zeus rose an eyebrow at his grandson before he shrugged. Well, I'm afraid I don't have an answer for that. Did you try asking the Welsh dragon? Issei nodded and crossed his arms. Drake was the one who told me about the scent in the first place. Perhaps Aphrodite knows. Issei stopped in his pace, and his eyes widened. Aunt Aphrodite? Zeus noticed his grandson stop, and the king of Olympus rose an eyebrow in puzzlement. What's with him? 30 minutes later. What do I owe this pleasure of the visit from my adorable little nephew? Issei sighed as he looked at the walls of the palace, in an attempt to keep his sight away from his aunt. An unearthly beautiful woman with shoulder-length almond brown hair and golden brown eyes smiled warmly in amusement as she watched her nephew. I have a question to ask you, Aunt Aphrodite. Aphrodite chuckled as she settled herself in her bed. And I might have an answer for you if you look at me, my little nephew. Issei's eyes widened, and he stiffened. Aphrodite giggled at her nephew, and she put her covers up in order to cover herself, in hopes to ensure Issei. I covered myself up, you can look now. Issei didn't believe his aunt's words for a second. She had pulled that trick too many times, that Issei couldn't even count how many times he had been tricked anymore. Issei. Gulping down a nervous lump in his throat, Issei slowly turned around to face his aunt, who sent him an amused smile. Now that we have the hesitance out of the way, what is your question? Rubbing the back of his head, Issei sighed. Do you know why someone like me has a scent? Aphrodite's smile disappeared and she tilted her head. Scent. Issei nodded in response, and then Aphrodite widened her eyes in remembrance. Scent. Well, Issei, each demigod has a scent that makes them trackable by other creatures. Now since you already know you're a demigod, your scent is much more stronger. Did any monsters come and attack you or anything while you were in the human world? Issei thought his aunt's question over. Up until now, he had already been fighting horrendous monsters in order to train his body. That does explain why the monsters he faced were so intent on killing him even before the training had commenced. But the devils at school, that they didn't seem like monsters to him. They weren't monsters, were they? Issei looked up at his aunt, and he rubbed the back of his head. Well, aside of training up here on Mount Olympus. But when I first arrived at my school, the devils who went to the same one as me were able to track me down. I noticed that most of the female devils that they seemed to not really enjoy my scent. It's kind of unsettling. Aphrodite looked at her nephew for a moment, and then she burst out laughing. Issei widened his eyes at his aunt, and he looked around, trying to find out what was so funny. He was so confused right now. Calming herself down, Aphrodite relaxed into a more comfortable position and smiled at her nephew. Such a silly boy. Haven't you realized it yet, Issei? Issei blinked in confusion, unable to even respond. Aphrodite chuckled softly. Well, aside from being a cute demigod, you seem to have an almost innate sense of innocence like your Aunt Astrea. Issei widened his eyes. Aunt Astrea? Aphrodite smiled warmly. In the human world, she represents purity, knowledge, reason, and innocence. You seem to be similar to her, despite not being her child, Issei. Issei adopted a thoughtful look as he listened to his aunt explain another member of his family. Aphrodite's smile widened. Yes, you certainly are interesting, my little nephew. Hey, Issei. Both Issei and Aphrodite looked to see a young man wearing traveling clothes, a flat hat, and winged sandals. He held a folded letter in his hand. Issei widened his eyes, while Aphrodite smirked. Uncle Hermes? Well, if it isn't my brother. Have you come to bring me a message? Hermes, the Greek god of transitions and boundaries, smiled as he looked at Issei. Yes, but the message isn't for you, Aphrodite, it's for Issei. Issei blinked in confusion, and he accepted the letter from his uncle. The young man opened the letter, and his eyes widened. Uncle Hephaestus? I wonder what he wants to see me for. Agora of Athens. Issei, you got my letter. Yeah. So what did you want to talk about? Issei crossed his arms and sat down as he listened to his uncle. Do you still have that sword I gave you? Issei blinked, and he lifted his hand, the familiar sword appearing within his grasp. The black-colored devil-horn-shaped sword with a pattern consisting of golden stripes gleamed. Hephaestus chuckled at the sight and got ready to explain. Issei, there is another reason I gave you this blade. In order to test if it was able to bond to your sacred gear. Issei widened his eyes. Bond? I see. Partner, summon your sacred gear. Blinking in confusion, Issei complied with the Welsh dragon, and he lifted his left arm up. Dragon Booster. Dragon Booster. The familiar red, claw-shaped gauntlet with yellow accents and green inscriptions manifested on Issei's left arm, its green jewels glowing with power. Issei rose an eyebrow and lifted his right hand up, which grasped his blade within. Combining a sword with a sacred gear? It sounds impossible. Sacred gears function according to the thoughts of the wielder, partner. If you simply wish it, then that wish shall be granted. Issei widened his eyes and he looked at his blade. He switched the blade into his left hand and held it tight. Partner, concentrate your will into the boosted gear, and then sync your energy with your blade. Concentrating his energy into the blade, Issei widened his eyes when he was almost blinded by a bright flash of light. The blade began to emit a bright aura, and the boosted gear appeared to be glowing in intensity. The flash gleamed even brighter, causing a pool of blinding light to escape the Agora of Athens. The light slowly faded, and Issei tentatively opened his eyes, and then he gasped. Ejected out of the boosted gear was his blade, gleaming from the light. Issei looked at his boosted gear, and then his eyes widened. What happened to the boosted gear? The armor of the boosted gear was now an onyx black color, and the jewel on top of the palm area was now a golden color. The accents were now black, but the inscriptions remained green. Issei widened his eyes further. It's like a black version of the boosted gear. It seems that the color of the blade has affected the coloration of the boosted gear. However, once you stop using the sword, the color should return to its original appearance. Issei blinked and concentrated his power once more, feeling relieved as his blade absorbed itself into his boosted gear. His sacred gear began to gain its red shade back, and then the artifact returned to its original form. Humph! Issei looked up at his uncle, who smirked in amusement. So I was correct. Your boosted gear absorbed your blade. Due to this, you should be able to manipulate the power of the sword quite easily. Interesting. Training grounds. Issei stood still, with his boosted gear revealed on his left hand. He looked over to his opponent, which was a large cyclops. Issei narrowed his eyes and looked at his boosted gear. He had trained with the sword that was sealed within his sacred gear for some time now. After sealing the sword back up, the boosted gear retained the onyx black coloration, along with the golden jewel. Uncle Hephaestus said I could also use the power of the sword even when it's sealed within. So would that mean I could use its powers as well? Perhaps. Setting his face into a serious look, Issei lifted his left arm up. A flaming aura manifested around the black boosted gear as the golden jewel glowed brightly. The aura increased in size, as a meteor-like sphere of energy began to manifest from his hand. Narrowing his eyes, Issei shot the meteor-like attack towards the Cyclops, who combusted and exploded as a result. Issei's eyes widened and he looked at his black-colored boosted gear, before sealing the full power of his blade, allowing his sacred gear to return to its original red color. Issei sighed and rubbed the back of his head as he sat on the bench. He tilted his head at the events that had happened today. When he returned home, he could sense the familiar auras of the devils he had come in contact with, and some unfamiliar auras of fallen angels near the church. He didn't really have to come in contact with any of them, so he went to the park. His eyes widened as he suddenly felt a familiar energy signal. He looked up just in time to avoid a light spear, and he automatically set himself into a battle stance. God damn it! I missed. Issei looked up to see the fallen angel he has seen yesterday, now in her true form. The uniform she had worn the day before was replaced by a black version of a Sand M outfit. Issei rose an eyebrow. Why is she dressed so immodestly? That she's a fallen angel, kid. What did you expect her to wear? A suit and a tie. Issei was about to reply, until another light spear was sent his way from the fallen angel. Her violet eyes widened in shock when her light spear disintegrated as soon as it touched Issei. What the hell? Are you using your sacred gear? Issei rose an eyebrow, and he tilted his head. No? The fallen angel's eyes widened further, and she took a step back. Issei sighed and rubbed the back of his head. It'd be pointless to kill her. After all, it's not like she's a potential threat. With a shrug, Issei turned around to walk away, and the fallen angel widened her eyes. Hey, where the hell do you think you're going? We're not finished here. Issei widened his eyes and rose an eyebrow as he turned around to face the fallen angel. Finished with what? We haven't really done anything important here. The fallen angel gasped, and then her eyes narrowed as she charged another light spear. Shut your mouth, you dash. Whoa. What exactly are you doing, Rainier? The fallen angel was cut off when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Both Issei and the fallen angel, now named Rainier, turned around to see a man in his 20s with black hair and golden bangs. He also had 12 jet black wings that come out from his back. Rainier widened her eyes in shock. Azazel-sama? Azazel smirked and crossed his arms as he set his sights over to a confused Issei. He sent Issei a nod and smirked wider. Looks like I made it just in time to see the Welsh dragon himself. Issei widened his eyes as Azazel fluttered the 12 jet black wings from his back. Azazel smiled, chuckling in amusement. Grandson of Zeus, it's so nice to meet you. He sure is an interesting boy, isn't he, Rias? Rias rose her head up to look at her childhood friend, Sona. The crimson-haired devil sighed and leaned back into her desk chair. There's absolutely no doubt about that. He is a very interesting boy. She sighed and placed her hand on her forehead. It's a shame he didn't want to join any peerages. I would have loved for him to join mine. She frowned softly, until her frown slowly morphed into a devious smile. Either way, I'll always be able to find him at school. And by that lovely scent of his. My darling Kohai can't hide from me. Forever. Humph. Rias looked up in surprise at Sona, who crossed her arms in amusement. And here I thought you would at least have some self-control, Rias. Seems I was wrong about you, my friend. Rias crossed her arms. And you believe you are any different, Sona? Sona chuckled and fixed her red glasses. Believe it or not, I actually have some restraint in dealing with our Kohai's scent. I wouldn't be so obsessed to the point of sneaking into his house, stripping out of my clothes, and getting into bed with him, while cuddling him like a teddy bear. Rias widened her blue-green eyes in shock, and she stiffened. Seeing the smug and amused look on Sona's face, Rias narrowed her eyes and straightened herself into her seat. How? Sona's smirk widened. How what? How did you find out? Tsubaki. How? Easy. She followed you when you snuck over to our Kohai's house. What? Why would you order her to do that? Oh, I didn't order her. She went on her own accord, on her own agenda. And why didn't you stop her? It amused me. Rias palmed her face in annoyance, and slammed her head on the desk. Sona chuckled a bit and looked out of the window. Sighing, Rias lifted her head up and looked over to her friend. Was there any particular reason Tsubaki followed me? Sona shot her friend an amused look in response and relaxed herself into a more comfortable position. She wanted to make sure you didn't try anything on Issei Hyoudou-kun. What? The part. Azazel-sama? What are you talking about? This kid can't be Dash. It may sound hard to believe, Rainier, but the Welsh dragon standing before us is indeed the grandson of Zeus. Rainier widened her violet eyes and looked over to Issei, who blinked several times in confusion. No way. He's a demigod? Issei tilted his head. Azazel. His name sounds familiar. I remember Grandpa mentioning him or something. Azazel chuckled and crossed his arms. Looks like I arrived here just in time, before things got bad. Issei rose an eyebrow. Bad? I was just gonna let her go. It's not like she could do any damage to me. Rainier, do you mind explaining to me why you were trying to exterminate the Welsh dragon, Issei Hyoudou? Azazel asked. Rainier stiffened, and she let go of her light spear. Aye. Azazel narrowed his eyes. Didn't I specifically order you to observe Issei? I never said anything about killing him. I mean that it's not like you would have stood a chance, but that's beside the point. Rainier looked over to the confused Issei, and then she sighed. Kokabil-sama dash. Never mind then. I see what happened. Rainier widened her eyes at Azazel's interruption. The leader of the fallen angels picked at his ear and yawned. It makes sense. He looked over at Issei. It seems that Kokabil was so afraid of the power of your sacred gear that he wanted to take some necessary precautions. So he ordered Rainier to kill you. Azazel then looked over to Rainier. You're very lucky the Welsh dragon doesn't have his grandfather's infamous temper, or else you would have had a lightning bolt shoved up your dash. Draig. I'm so lost right now. Rainier lowered her gaze and looked down at the ground. Azazel sighed. Are there any other fallen angels with you? Yes. I should have known. The male fallen angel sighed and shook his head. He then walked over to Issei and crossed his arms. Issei Hyoudou, would you mind unveiling your sacred gear? I just want to see something. Issei rose an eyebrow at the request. He doesn't seem to be a threat to you, partner. It's your choice. Thinking it over, Issei nodded, lifted his left arm up. Dragon Booster. Dragon Booster. The boosted gear manifested into its second form on Issei's left arm, with the green jewel embedded within, shining. Rainier widened her eyes in awe, while Azazel looked at the sacred gear with an excited smile. Amazing! So you already unlocked the second evolution. So I can assume you've already achieved the balance breaker form. Issei slowly nodded, prompting another smile from Azazel. What about the Juggernaut drive? Issei lowered his head and rubbed the back of it. Thought I haven't used that form for a while. Unless it's completely necessary, and if I have no other options, then I'll resort to using it. Azazel nodded at Issei's explanation, and he took a step back. Can you do anything else with your sacred gear? Issei widened his eyes. Well, that I can change the colors of its armor. Closing his eyes, Issei channeled the power of his blade sealed within his sacred gear, and the appearance of his boosted gear changed. The armor changed to a steel onyx black color, and the jewel was now a shining gold color. Azazel widened his eyes and he suddenly took out a cellular phone. This would look good as a screensaver. You mind if I take a picture? Issei rose an eyebrow, but he lifted his left arm up, nonetheless. Azazel smiled and he took the picture of the black version of the boosted gear, and pocketed his cell phone. Well, Welsh Dragon, I must be going now. Perhaps we'll see each other again. Let's go, Rainier. We need to pick up the rest of the fallen angels. Rainier gulped and quietly followed her leader, before Issei spoke up. Wait a minute, hold on. Azazel turned around and rose an eyebrow at the young man. How did you know Zeus was my grandfather? Azazel looked at Issei for a moment, before he smirked in response. I know an Olympian when I see one. And to be honest, I had no idea. I was just guessing that you were Zeus's grandson, and you proved me right. This makes things much more interesting. Issei widened his eyes. Interesting? Azazel turned around and crossed his arms. You've heard of the vanishing dragon before, haven't you? The white guy. Issei's eyes widened further in remembrance, and he nodded. Azazel smirked. I think he'll be content to know that his arch-rival is a demigod, and for that matter, the grandson of Zeus. Yes. Together the two of you will be powerful forces to be reckoned with. Issei blinked several times in confusion. Azazel smirked wider and motioned Rainier to follow him. Until we meet again, Issei Hyoudou. The wielder of the boosted gear stood motionless as he watched the two fallen angels walk away. Looking at his black-colored sacred gear, Issei sighed and turned around, walking away to another destination. At the abandoned church. Azazel-sama? 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 That's my name, don't wear it out. Azazel smiled in amusement as he recovered the fallen angels that had allied themselves with Rainier. One of the fallen angels was a middle-aged-looking gentleman with short black hair and dark blue eyes. The other was a tall and buxom woman with long, navy blue hair that obscured her right eye and brown eyes. And the last one was a girl with blonde hair styled in twin short side ponytails and blue eyes. Donasek, Calawarner, Middlet, do you any idea how much trouble you're in? Middlet, the blonde fallen angel, widened her eyes and flailed her arms around. What? Why, Azazel-sama? What did we do? Rainier sighed as she walked over to explain the situation to her comrades. We don't seem to have made a mistake. Donasek, the other male fallen angel, crossed his arms in annoyance. What do you mean, mistake? In the occult research club. Well, where is Tsubaki now? I don't know. I don't keep track of where she is all the time, not unlike what you do with our Kohai. For the last time, I'm not stalking him, Sona. I'm just out watching over him. Sneaking into his house and sleeping naked in his bed while cuddling him is not watching him. Rias's eyes twitched and she palmed her face. Sona scoffed and rolled her eyes. Honestly, Rias. Even I thought that you of all people would learn to control yourself. For goodness sake, even Tsubaki has a lot more self-control. Issei's house. Issei sighed as he laid upon his bed, his eyes growing heavy. He'd never felt so tired in his life, and yet he didn't even fight anyone today. Sure, he was attacked by a fallen angel, but it wasn't like she could lay a finger on him anyway. He had to admit it to himself, that he was a little surprised that the leader of the fallen angels had come to see him and Rainier. The vanishing dragon. Azazel said he's supposed to be my eternal arch-rival. The young man sighed and fixed his pillow. It'll probably be a long time before I even meet him. Sighing again, Issei closed his eyes, ready to fall into a peaceful sleep. Suddenly Issei's closet door opened, revealing a familiar devil. She had knee-length black hair with split bangs and light brown eyes. She wore the Ko Academy girls' school uniform and blue, semi-rimmed glasses with square lenses. Narrowing her light brown eyes, the girl stealthily walked over to Issei's bed and slowly crawled on top of it. Settling herself on top of Issei, the girl brought her face close to Issei's own, her brown eyes peering into his innocent sleeping face. Issei's eyes fluttered as he felt someone breathing on him, and he opened his brown eyes. His eyes widened further in shock and a bit of fright. Staring down at him was none other than Tsubaki Shinra. Her light brown eyes looked upon him, extremely focused. Issei's breath caught in his throat, and he kept his mouth shut. He was too scared to even say anything. This is quite a predicament. Wonder how you're going to get yourself out of this one, partner. Brown eyes opened and fluttered, and then they shot wide open. Issei looked around his room and sighed. Feud.it was just a dream. He got ready to move, until he found that he couldn't move at all. His eyes widening in confusion, Issei struggled to move, and then he stiffened. He looked down to see that he was trapped within the grasp of someone. Struggling to keep his mouth shut, Issei slowly looked up, and his breath caught in his throat once again. Why couldn't it be a dream? He was within the grasp of Tsubaki Shinra, who was sleeping peacefully, an action which was greatly different compared to how she was staring at him last night. Last night, her light brown eyes had set her sights on Issei, almost in a possessive trance. Issei was wondering how he had survived the night with the devil staring at him. But fortunately, the Shinra devil was now asleep, albeit with her arms wrapped around Issei possessively. Issei widened his eyes and he swallowed a nervous lump in his throat. Kukukuku. When the heiress of the Gremory clan snuck over here, she merely held you like a teddy bear. The Shinra devil, on the other hand, is holding you like a snake. A constrictor, as a matter of fact. Issei blinked several times in confusion, before his eyes widened once more. Wait, you knew Gremory-senpai was in my house 2 nights ago? And you didn't say anything? I was tired. The young man was about to give the Welsh dragon a piece of his mind, until he remembered that a sleeping devil, who was currently squeezing him like an affectionate snake, was next to him. Issei kept his mouth shut, and settled for staying still. Hopefully Shinra-senpai will wake up soon. Tsubaki ummed a bit as she moved about in Issei's bed, tightening her hold on Issei, whose face flushed in shock. Kukukuku. Better make sure that hope actually exists, partner. Issei nervously lifted up his side of the covers, and he silently sighed in relief. Good, at least he still had his clothes on. He warily looked over at Tsubaki, and his eyes widened when he saw that the bed covers were only covering up to her naked shoulders. Issei's mouth closed and opened like a fish, and then he just shut his mouth altogether. 30 minutes later. For a devil who appears to be a serious person, she sure does sleep for a long time. If Issei had more free space, he would have palmed himself in the face repeatedly. First Rias had snuck into his house, and now Tsubaki? Were more girls going to do this to him? What did he do to deserve this? He was a good person. Calm yourself, partner. I must say it was a bit amusing for a little while, but I just have to say this. Just deal with it. You can't tell me that you do not find women to be attractive. Issei opened his mouth, and then he frowned softly. It's not that, Drake. It's just that this has never happened to me before. I do feel that girls are attractive. I really do. I'm just not familiar with them, I guess. You know, Issei, I am well aware that you are nervous. After all, the last time you have been home was when you were merely 5 years old. You've spent all your time at Mount Olympus. It's no wonder you are the way you are. Do you remember what I told you about dragons? The young man blinked in confusion. Dragons fascinate those around them. Or those with power gather around the dragons. If there are people who come to you with admiration or to challenge you, then it's most likely the power of the dragon. However, there are women who would come to you as well. Issei widened his eyes in confusion. What? All of my earlier hosts were surrounded by the opposite section. In your case, bonus for you, due to your Olympian heritage, along with the sacred gear. Your scent is not the only thing that attracts women to you, partner. It is power as well. Or that I could be wrong, but perhaps mostly your personality is what attracts the women to you. Issei's eyes gained a saddened look, and he lowered his head. That could be either or, my host. The young man sighed, and looked up at the ceiling with a somber look in his eyes. His life sure was strange. All his life, he had spent time at Mount Olympus, training in order to hone himself into a formidable fighter. From all of that training, Issei often stood by himself. When arriving back home, it was clear to him that his social skills weren't exactly at the top to begin with. Issei tilted his head and sighed. Issei widened his eyes and looked over to Tsubaki, who was rubbing her light brown eyes. Fluttering her eyes several times, Tsubaki sent her sights to Issei, who blinked several times in confusion. Slowly releasing Issei from her grasp, Tsubaki crossed her arms, and a light blush reddened on her face. Issei blinked and rubbed the back of his head. Hyoudou-san. Yes, Shinra-senpai? Tsubaki looked at Issei, and her eyes softened. I apologize if I made you uncomfortable. It was not my intention. I'd unexpectedly lost control of myself. Issei widened his eyes and he lowered his head. Tsubaki tilted her head, and she lifted her hand up, gently placing it on Issei's cheek. Issei flinched a little at the unexpected contact, but he remained where he was. Tsubaki then brought her face over, and gently pressed her lips to Issei's forehead, planting a soft kiss on it. Issei blinked several times, and his eyes widened. Seconds later, Tsubaki removed her lips from Issei, but kept her hand on his cheek. Thank you, for letting me sleep here. Issei remained quiet, not really knowing what to say, or how to handle the situation he was in. His eyes widened further, when Tsubaki placed another soft kiss onto his forehead. 2 days later, on the rooftop of Kuo Academy. Sitting quietly on the rooftop of his school, Issei frowned softly as he rubbed the kiss mark from Tsubaki on his forehead. There was no physical sign that the mark was there, but Issei knew it was still present. The young man sighed and rubbed the back of his head. First Rias and now Tsubaki. At least Tsubaki was actually a little more comfortable to be around. Rias was not overly affectionate. She reminded him a lot of his Aunt Aphrodite. That wasn't a good thing. Quickly shaking his head, Issei looked out into the morning sun. Tilting his head at the brightness, Issei sighed as he stood up. Welsh dragon. Humph, so this is my rival. Issei widened his eyes and turned around to see a young man with transparent light blue eyes and dark silver hair. He wore a dark green shirt under a black jacket with the collar flipped up, and red jeans covered by black armored pads. The white guy. Issei blinked several times, and then he set his eyes into a serious look. The vanishing dragon. He straightened himself up and turned around to face the silver-haired young man. Unbeknownst to the two, pools of energy began to manifest as bright auras. A crimson aura manifested around Issei, while a light blue aura manifested around the silver-haired young man. Their auras radiated around the rooftop of Kuo Academy. Issei then closed his eyes, his aura fading in relaxation. If you want to fight me, we can't do it here. The young man with silver hair smirked in response as his blue aura faded. Relax, I have no intention of fighting you. At least not today. The two stood in silence until the vanishing dragon spoke up. My name is Valley. And judging by the look on your face, you already know what I am. Issei Hyoudou. Issei nodded in response, and Valley looked over to the rise of the sun. We share a legacy, you and I. The Welsh dragon and the vanishing dragon. These two mighty dragons fought each other for many years. The only question is, how will you end up? Issei's eyes gained a serious edge to them. What about you? How will you end up? Valley smiled and shrugged his shoulders. No one knows, Welsh dragon. Only time will tell. Issei widened his eyes a little, before narrowing them. He looked out to the sun, crossing his arms. So if you're not here to fight me, then what are you doing here? Valley smirked and set his blue eyes to Issei. Azazel sent me to come get you. Issei widened his eyes again, and Valley's smirk widened. It seems he has a mission that requires the both of us dragons. Issei blinked several times as he and Valley waited for Azazel to speak. The young man was surprised that the leader of the fallen angels had called him and the vanishing dragon together. He looked over to the vanishing dragon, who laid his back against the wall, his eyes closed with a calm air about him. The vanishing dragon. According to Valley, he and Issei shared a legacy together, due to them being the hosts of the two heavenly dragons. The two heavenly dragons possessed powers that rivaled or even surpassed that of a god and Satan. Although Issei didn't know why the two dragons fought at all, he knew that if the two heavenly dragons were to combine together, they would be an immensely powerful force to reckon with. Issei lowered his head and crossed his arms. Do you remember what was the reason for you and Albion fighting in the first place? Draig. Issei Hyoudou Valley. Both Issei and Valley looked towards Azazel, who crossed his arms in amusement. I have a mission for you too. It has come to my attention that one of the leaders of Grigori desires to start another great war. To be frank, I don't want another war to start. Too many races of the three factions have already perished, and I rather it didn't happen once again. Issei widened his eyes, while Valley looked on with cool eyes. Azazel narrowed his eyes and closed them. From what I've gathered, Kokabeel has followers, and they took 3 of the 7 Excaliburs from the church. Valley scoffed and looked over to Issei. If he's that desperate to steal some of the Excaliburs just to start another war, then he's not even worth our time. Issei frowned and looked up at the ceiling in thought. This doesn't sound good. He looked over to Azazel. So, what do you want us to do? Azazel opened his eyes and sighed. There was a man named Valpergaliel, also known as the Genocide Archbishop. He did human experiments to find people who had the potential to use the pieces of Excalibur. When it turned out that the person was incapable, they were disposed of. Issei narrowed his eyes, and Azazel got into a more comfortable position in his seat. He looked over to Valley. This may come as a surprise to you, but I actually need you to save someone, Valley. Valley rose an eyebrow in response. Save someone? That's not how I do things, Azazel. I'll fight someone, but saving. Azazel narrowed his eyes. That's someone I need you to save. She possesses the sacred gear known as Twilight Healing. According to my sources, she's being held up by Kokabeel into the abandoned church. Valley sneered and crossed his arms. So he captured a girl just so she can heal him. Humph, pathetic. Fine, I'll comply with your orders. Azazel nodded and looked over to Issei, who looked down on the ground in concentration. Welsh dragon, I need you to do something for me. After Val is done with saving the girl, he's going to help you as well. Issei looked over to Valley, who gave him an amused smirk. So, what do you want us to do? To H Academy. Narrowing their eyes darkly, Rias, Aquino, Kaneko, and Yuto settled themselves into battle positions as they stood against fallen angel Kokobile. With them was a young woman with short, blue hair, with a green fringe in the middle and brown eyes. Before the battle with Kokobile started, Sona gathered everyone from the student council to form a durable barrier around the school to make sure that the battle wouldn't leak outside. Kokobile smirked as he approached the devils and young woman. He lifted his fist up and smirked wider. Rias narrowed her eyes darkly and clenched her fists. No matter what she and Peerage did, they couldn't do a single thing to Kokobile. Her teammate, by the name of Zenobia, had lost strength, her emotional strength, when the fallen angel had revealed that God of the Bible ceased to exist. The devils, fallen angels, and angels had known all along, and the death of God was kept as a secret in order to prevent chaos from commencing and the increased chances of an attack. From here on out, I will start a war. I will take your heads as a gift. Even if it's only me, I will continue from where we left off. I'm going to show Serzex and Michael that we, the fallen angels, are the greatest beings. Bustist. Rias and Aquino looked up to see a bright crimson light cutting through the barrier around the school. A black-plated armor with golden jewels across the armor flew down towards fallen angel Kokobile, who took a step back. It's you. The Red Dragon Emperor. I recognize that armor, besides the strange color change. The Red Dragon Emperor tilted his head, and his armor glowed, its black shade changing back into its dark red shade. Kokobile narrowed his eyes. One of the Longinus, boosted gear. If you are already in armor mode, it means that it's in the balance breaker state. Boosted gear scale male. Such an annoying dash. The fallen angel was cut off when the Red Dragon Emperor sent a harsh uppercut to his face. Kokobile coughed out blood, and he gasped when he felt one of his wings being plucked off. UBSTRD. My wing. The Red Dragon Emperor held up the wing and held it tightly. A pool of energy formed into his hand, and the wing disintegrated into his hand. Kokobile took another step back and growled, summoning a great number of light spears appearing in the sky. With a growl, he sent them down towards the figure, who merely stood where he was. As the light spears shot down towards him, the Red Dragon Emperor slowly walked towards the fallen angel, completely ignoring the light spears hitting him. Kokobile gasped and levitated up into the air, ready to fly away. The Red Dragon Emperor shook its head, and it suddenly transmitted away. Rias widened her eyes. Who is that? And what is this power I'm sensing from him? Her blue-green eyes widened further when she began to smell a familiar and desirable scent. Issei. The Red Dragon Emperor appeared in front of Kokobile and shot his fist deep into the fallen angel's stomach, causing him to vomit blood onto the ground. How can this be? The figure in his scale male form punched Kokobile in the face and grabbed onto his wings, soaring down towards the ground. Slamming the fallen angel into the ground, the Red Dragon Emperor bashed Kokobile's head into the ground 3 more times, and then he stopped. Welsh Dragon. The Red Dragon Emperor turned to see a figure in shining white armor, who flew down towards him. The figure in the white armor was carrying a young man with short white hair who was unconscious in his grasp. I dropped the Twilight Healing Girl at your house. I'll take Kokobile and send him back to Azazel. He has some questions to ask him. The Red Dragon Emperor looked at the Vanishing Dragon, before he lifted Kokobile up and threw the fallen angel to the Vanishing Dragon, who caught him effortlessly. A bright white glow enveloped him, and he flew up into the sky. Welsh Dragon. We'll meet each other again. Let it be known, our time to fight is inevitable. So be ready. The Red Dragon Emperor remained where he was, and then he nodded. You as well. And with that, the Vanishing Dragon disappeared into the light. Looking up at the sky, the Red Dragon Emperor flew up into the sky, ready to go home. Rias widened her eyes, as well as the rest of her peerage. Wait, hold on. The Red Dragon Emperor didn't stop, flying up into the sky as though he didn't hear the crimson-haired devil. Rias's eyes softened, and she put her hand on her chest. Was that Issei? Issei's house. Issei widened his eyes as he looked at a girl with long blonde hair sleeping on his living room couch. She was clad in a dark teal nun outfit with light blue accents, a white veil over her head, and brown boots. She sighed softly as she slept peacefully. Issei rose an eyebrow and rubbed the back of his head. Why on earth did Valley bring her to my house? Because I let him. The young man widened his eyes and turned around to see his mother, Hiromi Hai. She held a soft frown on her face in worry. Issei's eyes softened. Mom. Where have you been, young man? I've been worried. Issei rubbed the back of his head again, and lowered his head. Azazel called me and the Vanishing Dragon to help him with something. He was worried about a rogue fallen angel trying to start another great war between the three factions. I guess I just didn't want anything bad to happen. Hiromi fixed her son with a hardened frown, and then her eyes softened. Honeyda, why would you risk your life like that? The heritage we have, along with the Norse, Hindu, and Roman gods, have nothing to do with the war between the three factions. We never got involved with them. Issei lowered his head again and sighed. Hiromi's eyes softened once more, and she went over to hug her son. I'm glad you're using your power for a good cause, Issei. I just want you to be more careful in your decisions. Your father, myself, and your grandfather knew that you would encounter the supernatural eventually, but I didn't think it would happen so fast. Issei's eyes softened as he understood his mother's worry for him. Hesitantly, he wrapped his arms around her, patting her on the back softly. I'll be fine, Mom. I promise. I've made it this far, thanks to Grandpa, Dad, and Drake. Hiromi sniffled and smiled softly, hugging her son tightly. 2 hours later, Issei slept peacefully in his bed, a bit fatigued by the short, yet weird event he had participated in today. He had defeated a leader of the fallen angels, Kokobile, who was stated by Valley that he was 8 times as strong as a fallen angel. The young man moved his head, trying to find a more comfortable position on his pillow. He sighed when he found it and he relaxed. Suddenly, his room window opened, and a familiar female devil crawled inside the room. Tsubaki kept her stoic expression as she slowly walked over to Issei's bed. Looking down upon him, she lifted her hand and lowered it to caress Issei's cheek. Her eyes lidded slightly as she felt Issei's soft skin against her palm. She knew it was him. The Red Dragon Emperor. She knew it was Issei. She knew it was him all along. While she and the rest of the student council maintained the barrier around the school, the Red Dragon Emperor had effortlessly broken through the barrier. As soon as he had done that, he began to pummel Kokobile with little to no effort. Tsubaki narrowed her light brown eyes as she lifted her hand, placing it top of Issei's head. She rubbed his hair gently, caressing his brown locks. Hyoudou-kun. She whispered. Tsubaki knew that Issei's inborn scent was not the cause of her affection for him. At first, she did not understand what had drawn her to Issei. The first time she saw him in the occult research club, she honestly thought of him as someone who was nervous, shy even. Then her affection for him seemed to grow the longer Issei was at Kuo Academy. She had to admit it to herself. She found Issei's shyness strangely endearing. That was why she had followed Rias Gremory when the crimson-haired devil had snuck over to Issei's house. She was worried that the daughter of the Gremory clan would try something. For some reason, Tsubaki had a powerful desire to keep Issei's innocence intact. She adored his innocence, and it was too late until she realized that she felt protective of Issei. Tsubaki didn't know what had come over her when she had stripped off her school clothes and slept next to Issei. She knew she frightened him when she sat upon his bed, staring down at him. Eventually, Issei had miraculously fallen asleep, and Tsubaki took that opportunity to cuddle with Issei. She wasn't used to the technique of cuddling, so she went with her instincts, and ended up cuddling him like a possessive constrictor. Such an oxymoron. Issei's strength was nothing to be joked around. However, his personality didn't fit with his power at all. He was introverted, shy, and so innocent. Tsubaki lowered her head and licked her lips as she was inches above Issei's face. As soon as she was about to press her lips onto Issei's own, she suddenly stopped and closed her eyes. No. She lifted her head up and moved her hand onto Issei's cheek, rubbing it gently. She wouldn't kiss him yet. Not like this. For the first time Tsubaki felt strange. Her heart rate was beating fast, her heart was fluttering, her chest felt warm, and a red blush had brightened onto her cheeks. Tsubaki took a deep breath and sighed. She lowered her head and pressed her lips onto Issei's forehead, giving him a warm kiss. Normally, Tsubaki was stoic, serious to the point of having a cold exterior about her. But Issei Hyoudou, he made her feel so warm. She still didn't understand it herself. He was so. Tsubaki shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. She hesitantly removed her hand from Issei's cheek and lowered her head, planting her lips onto Issei's cheek. Sweet dreams that Hyoudou-kun. One day later, in the occult research club, Rias sat at her desk with a serious expression as she looked at her new peerage. After the unexpected arrival of the Red Dragon Emperor and the Vanishing Dragon, Zenobia, after finding out that God of the Bible no longer existed, abandoned her ways and reincarnated into a devil. She was now a night piece, and had become a second-year student at Kuo Academy and a member of the occult research club. Rias looked up at her new knight and narrowed her eyes. Any news on Irina Shidou? Zenobia nodded and crossed her arms. Irina returned to headquarters along with the corpse of Balba and the 5 Excaliburs including mine. The fragments that act as the cores were retrieved in that state. So the mission of retrieving it was accomplished. If they have the cores, they can use alchemy to make the holy swords again. Rias sighed and palmed her forehead. This incident was sent to the God side and the devil's side by the viceroy of the fallen angels, Azazel. The theft of the Excalibur was an action taken by Kokabeel only. The other leaders didn't know about it. He planned to break the tension between the 3 sides. Because he tried to start another war, he was put in the Cocytus for eternity in a frozen state. Rias paused in her words, and her eyes softened. Issei-kun. The Red Dragon Emperor and the Vanishing Dragon intervened at the last moment, and they both saved us. There is a meeting between the representatives of the angels, devils, and Azazel. Apparently there is something Azazel wants to talk about. I heard that maybe Azazel would be apologizing about Kokabeel then. Though it's suspicious if Azazel would apologize. The crimson-haired devil narrowed her eyes, and she put her hand on her cheek. The Vanishing Dragon and the Red Dragon Emperor are destined to be rivals, and yet, they seem to be working together. 1 week later, in the occult research club. Rias, are you all right? Rias looked up at her childhood friend, who was accompanied with Tsubaki and Saji. The crimson-haired devil sighed and crossed her arms. It's nothing. Sona rose an eyebrow. Is it about your fiancé? Rias narrowed her eyes and clenched her fists. Yes. Sona sighed and crossed her arms. The Gremory clan is adamant about putting you with the heir of the Phoenix clan. There doesn't seem to be anything you can do to change that. What about a raiding game? The devils looked over at the club door to see Issei rubbing the back of his head. Tsubaki maintained her stoic expression, but her eyes noticeably softened. Rias widened her eyes, Sona rose an eyebrow, and Suji crossed his arms. Rias sat up from her seat. Issei-kun? What are you doing here? Issei looked away and rubbed his head again. I heard one of you guys mention something about the Phoenix clan. They're famous in the raiding games. Saji rose an eyebrow. How do you know so much about raiding games, newbie? Issei blinked several times at the nickname, but he let it go. My grandpa used to take me to watch raiding games when I was little. Saji widened his eyes in response. He did? Who's your grandfather? Issei widened his eyes slightly, and he rubbed the back of his head in a nervous habit. I don't really like to talk about him. Saji smiled. Oh come on man Saji, Hyoudou-san doesn't have to reveal his heritage. It's his choice, said Sona. Saji pouted, but he let it go. Rias looked over to Issei, and she crossed her arms. A raiding game actually might work. When he comes over to the club, I'll suggest a raiding game. Knowing him, he won't refuse a challenge. Sona rose an eyebrow, smirking in amusement. Humph, you sure sound happy now. Issei blinked several times in confusion. Rias smiled as she put one hand on her desk. I'll train my peerage for 10 days. that should give us enough time. 10. Rias looked up at Issei, who gave her a confused look. Is 10 too much? Issei rubbed the back of his head. Point 10 is actually too little. Rias widened her eyes. Too little? Issei nodded and he straightened himself into a more comfortable standing position. Well, it'll be kind of hard to tell how many days you need to train, Gremory-senpai. Do you know how many members this riser person has in his peerage? Rias lifted a finger up, and then she stopped as she tried to remember. 15. Issei widened his eyes. Wow, that's a lot. Indeed. She'll need more than 10 days to train. Gremory-senpai, I think you'll need more than 10 days. If this riser guy has 15 members, it's going to be a little tough to beat him. Do you know what the strengths and weaknesses of his peerage are? Rias widened her eyes, looking at her kohai in curiosity. Issei-kun must have gone to a lot of raiding games. She shook her head to clear her thoughts. Not yet. Issei blinked several times, and he rubbed his head again. Well, when he and his peerage come by later, I guess you can study the peerage while you and Riser discuss the raiding game. After all, there's no point in training for a raiding game if you don't even know the abilities of your opponent's peerage. Rias blinked several times, and even Sona's eyes widened a little. Saji's eyes widened at how informational Issei sounded, while Tsubaki looked over to Issei with an unreadable look on her face. Issei, noticing the stares from all the other devils, felt a familiar nervousness rising, and went to reach for the club door. He looked over to Rias. It might work, Gremory-senpai. He exited the occult research club, leaving the 4 devils in the room. Rias looked at her desk in concentration, crossing her arms. Sona held a look of seriousness on her face, while Saji crossed his arms, wondering how Issei was so knowledgeable. Tsubaki had her sights on the door, her eyes softening slightly. Hyoudou-kun. Shopping center. Issei-sen. W8. Don't run so fast, Asia-san. Issei sprinted to catch up to the girl with flowing blonde hair and soft green eyes. Asia Argento, the wielder of the sacred gear known as Twilight Healing, happily ran into the store, looking all around the items of the shop. Issei shook his head as he looked around the store. It was his mother's idea to take Asia shopping so the nun could purchase some new clothes to wear. Much to Issei's dismay, Hiromi had chosen to leave Issei all alone with Asia. Issei didn't know what type of clothes would suit Asia at all. Since she was part of the church from such a young age, the clothes worn today in society were a bit lost on her. That was why Issei was trying to keep a close watch on the nun. Issei-sen. Over here. Issei inwardly sighed as he followed Asia over to the women's section. He saw Asia grab a few items of clothing and went into the changing room. Issei rubbed the back of his head, and he sat down on the waiting chairs. You impressed me a little back there, partner. Issei blinked in confusion. Huh. When you told the daughter of the Gremory clan about your thoughts on the raiding game. Well, like I said. There's no point in training in for a raiding game if you don't know anything about your opponent and his or her peerage. Issei-sen. Issei looked up to see Asia in a blue top with a pink skirt underneath. The young man widened his eyes at her appearance, and he blinked several times. Asia smiled at his reaction and went back into the changing room. Issei sighed and rubbed his head in exhaustion. I wonder how long we're going to be here. Asia quickly ran out of the changing room. Issei noticed this and widened his eyes. Asia-san. Asia turned around and smiled cheerfully. I'll be back, I'm looking for more outfits to try on. And with that, the nun ran all the way into the women's section, leaving an even more exhausted Issei. I can tell you this, it's sure not going to be 2 hours. 3 hours later, Hiromi Hyoudou chuckled softly as she watched Asia walk out of the store with 2 bags in her hands. The Hyoudou mother widened her eyes as she watched her son carrying what looked to almost be 10 bags on his back. Issei sighed as he dropped the shopping bags in his mother's car trunk. Crossing his arms, the young man watched Asia put in her 2 bags in the trunk. The nun smiled widely, and she hugged the surprised Issei tightly. Thank you so much, Daisen. Issei widened his eyes at the contact, and Hiromi smiled warmly at the scene. Letting go of Issei, Asia opened the car door, going into the back of the car. Hiromi looked over at her son, who was still outside of the car. Are you coming home, honey? Issei shook his head in response. Not yet. I think I'll just take a little walk. After all, it's not that dark yet. Hiromi frowned softly, and then she sighed. Alright, but don't stay too long. Issei. As his mother drove off, Issei looked around his surroundings, trying to think of somewhere else to go. Welsh dragon. The young man turned around to find the direction of the voice, and his eyes widened. Valley. The vanishing dragon smirked at his rival as he crossed his arms. Issei blinked several times in confusion. What was Valley doing here? He didn't seem like the type to hang out in an area like this. What are you doing here? He hadn't seen Valley since the battle with Kokobile. If it could even be called a battle anyway, but that's beside the point. Valley shrugged and looked away. I was bored. So I thought walking around aimlessly might have cancelled out my boredom for a bit. Issei rose an eyebrow and blinked in response. His rival was bored? That's why he was near some shopping centers? Huh. Looking around the area, Issei rubbed the back of his head. So what happened to Kokobile? Did Azazel do anything to him? Valis smiled and looked over at his rival. Did Azazel do anything to him, you ask? He sealed him into the deepest trenches of the underworld. That's what he did. Issei widened his eyes. Cositis. The vanishing dragon nodded in response. That's correct. Poor bestiardi. Kukukuku. Issei looked down on the ground and crossed his arms. Welsh dragon. The young man looked up at Valet, who closed his eyes, smiling in amusement. The other reason I came here was because Azazel wanted me to tell you that there's going to be a meeting between the three factions. Issei widened his eyes again. The three factions? Are they doing a peace treaty or something? Valet shrugged in response. Perhaps. We'll just have to find out when we get there, now won't we? Issei sighed and rubbed the back of his head. Do you know where this meeting is? Don't have to worry about that. It's at your school, Welsh dragon. My school. Valet chuckled in response and put his hands in his pockets. Is there an echo out here or something? 2 hours later, Issei's house. Issei sighed as he waked into his house. He opened his eyes and widened them in surprise. His 4 senpais, also known as the 4 most popular girls at Kuo Academy, were in his living room, drinking tea with his mother. Hiromi looked behind herself to see her surprised son. Issei, you're home early than I expected. Issei didn't respond to his mother as he looked over at Rias Gremory, Akino Himejima, Sona Citri, and Tsubaki Shinra. What were they doing in his house? He already had to suffer with Rias and Tsubaki sneaking into his room. Well, at least Tsubaki had more self-control than Rias. He just hoped that Sona and Akino had the same amount of self-control as the 4th popular girl at school did. Gremory-senpai? Himejima-senpai? Citri-senpai? Shinra-senpai? What are you all doing here? Rias smiled as she put her cup of tea down on the table. The rest of the girls and I wanted to talk to you about something important. Your mother was kind enough to let us in. Issei blinked as he looked over to his mother, who got up to go to the kitchen. You kids clean up any mess you make. Now alone with his 4 senpais, Issei began to feel a strange feeling. Sitting on the couch across the 4 beauties, Issei gulped down a nervous lump in his throat. Rias smiled at her kohai. You look so nervous. We don't scare you that much, do we, Akun? The young man chose not to respond, knowing if he said anything now, it would have sounded stupid. So he settled with a shake of his head, and looked up at his 4 senpais. So, is something the matter? Rias settled herself into a comfortable spot and looked into Issei's eyes. Do you remember the discussion we had today, Issei? About the rating game? Issei widened his eyes at the memory, and he nodded. Yeah. Rias smiled. 2 hours later after you had left, Riser came into the club room to discuss about our engagement. And at some point, I mentioned that we could settle our debate with a rating game. And he accepted it, and I got him to agree on how many days I would be able to train my peerage. Issei widened his eyes further. The question is, how many days did she decide on? Issei rubbed the back of his head. So how many days did you pick? 21. Issei blinked again, and he tilted his head slightly. 21. Rias's eyes widened a little in hesitance. Was that not a good interval? The young man blinked several times before looking away. Actually, 21 doesn't sound too bad. The crimson-haired devil smiled in response. Issei then widened his eyes and turned to look at Rias. So why are you telling me all this, Gremory-senpai? Because she needs your help, Hyoudou-san. The young man blinked as he looked over to Sona, who fixed her red glasses. Help? Help with what? In training her and her peerage. What? But why me? A small blush formed on Rias's face as she crossed her arms. Back at the Occult Research Club, you seem to know a lot about the rating games, Issei-kun. Issei blinked again in great confusion. But I'm not a devil. Am I allowed to help you at all? Rias smiled as she lifted up a finger. Riser never said I had any restrictions on how my training should go about. Issei widened his eyes. So, that you just need help on training? But aren't you a high-class devil? Doesn't that mean you don't need any help? Rias blushed and looked away, while Akino covered her mouth, laughing in amusement. Afuffet. Our adorable Kohai is so confused. Issei blinked again and rubbed the back of his head. I'm so lost right now. Why does Gremory-senpai want my help? Well, it's obvious, partner. Perhaps the devils here want to spend some time with you. And let's face it, we haven't exactly spent enough time with the daughter of the Gremory clan, or her peerage at all. Perhaps, along with your help, they could be a formidable peerage. But that is just my opinion. The young man crossed his arms. I guess I could help. 21 days might work. A bright smile formed on Rias's face as she practically jumped over the table to hug Issei, who was caught off guard by her movement. Trying to suppress his nervousness, Issei looked over to his other 3 senpais. Akino giggled softly, while Sona and Tsubaki maintained their usual serious expressions. Citri-senpai, Shinra-senpai? Why you here? Do you two have a rating game also? Sona smiled as she crossed her arms. It's nothing of the sort, Hyoudou-san. We merely came to accompany Rias and Akino, because Tsubaki, Saji, and I are also coming along to watch. Issei widened his eyes in response. So, all of them, including Saji, are coming to train? This really sounds like a lot of people. Issei's room. Issei opened his door, and his eyes widened once more in surprise. Whose bags are those? The young man pointed to 4 bags in the middle of his room. His eyes widened further as he thought of something. They're not staying here for the night, are they? Kukukuku. You've already gotten 4 devils. Impressive, partner. I'm not doing it on purpose. I know. That's why it's so funny. Hyoudou-kun. Issei widened his eyes and turned around to see Tsubaki standing next to his room door. Shinra-senpai. The Shinra devil crossed her arms and looked at Issei. You do not have to refer to me as you do now. You may call me by my first name. Issei blinked several times, and he looked back over to the 4 bags in his room. Tsubaki-senpai, what are? Tsubaki looked over to see where Issei was pointing, and she walked over to him. Kaicho and the rest of us have decided that we stay at your house the night before Rias's training begins. So we brought our belongings here. The young man rubbed the back of his head. Did any of you bring your own mattresses? No. Issei noticed that Tsubaki had answered his question a little too quickly, and he felt that familiar nervousness rising. Kukukuku. Scratch that, partner. You now have 4 devils sharing you and your bed. Issei's house. It sure was nice for our adorable Kohai to let us sleep in his room. Afufu. Yes, it was. I didn't expect him to be so polite. Of course he is. After all, he's our precious Kohai. Perhaps putting our bags in Hyoudou-kun's room without informing him was a bit too much. Akino, Rias, Sona, and Tsubaki sat on Issei's bed as they chatted about. After Issei had discovered that the devils had forgotten, or in Issei's opinion, neglected, to bring any mattresses for themselves, he let them use his mattress. There was no way he was going to sleep in the same bed with his 4 senpais. Especially if all of them joined together, They wouldn't fit in the bed anyway. Plus, Issei wanted to be polite. So the young man did the only thing he could think of. He chose to sleep on the couch in his living room. At least he wouldn't be uncomfortable upstairs with the four devils. That sure was modest of you, partner. Issei sighed as he tried to find a more comfortable position on the couch. It had almost been 2 hours, and he still couldn't sleep. Huffing softly, the young man got up from the couch, and then a lightning aura enveloped him. Concentrating his energy, Issei closed his eyes and transported away. On the rooftop of Issei's house. Reappearing on the roof of his house, Issei sat down and tilted his head as he watched the stars in the sky. Tilting his head, Issei laid down on the roof, putting his hands behind his head. The stars are brighter than usual tonight. Hyoudou-kun. The young man widened his eyes and looked up to see Tsubaki looking down at him with her arms crossed. Tsubaki-senpai. Making sure to keep her balance on the rooftop, Tsubaki walked over to Issei, sitting down next to him. "What are you doing out here?" she asked. Issei blinked, and then he looked up at the sky, rubbing the back of his head. "I had a little trouble falling asleep. So I guess I wanted to go on the rooftop for a bit and watch the stars. It's actually more peaceful for me." Tsubaki looked at Issei momentarily, and then she looked up at the stars in the sky. Issei was right, it was actually peaceful out here, despite the night sky. "What are you doing out here, Tsubaki-senpai?" The Shinra devil turned to look at Issei, and she crossed her legs. "That I could not sleep either." Issei blinked several times. "Was something wrong with my bed?" "Yes, that you were not in there to keep me warm." Tsubaki shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. "Nothing is wrong." The young man tilted his head in confusion and looked back up at the stars. Tsubaki looked up at the stars, and a luminescent blush formed on her face. She crossed her arms as she felt her body begin to tingle. Her heart was pounding, and she felt the unfamiliar sensation of butterflies in her stomach. She didn't understand why this was happening to her. She was one of the most serious and stoic individuals in the school of Kuo Academy. She was stoic to the point of having a cold and scary aura about her. And here she was, blushing profusely at a naive, shy yet kind-hearted boy. Tsubaki still couldn't comprehend what attracted her to Issei so much. It was so strange to her. She really didn't know that much about him. All she knew about him was where he lived, his shy manner, and his sacred gear, that was all. Although the boy didn't appear to be so, Issei was actually a mystery. The devils in the occult research club and the student council knew what Issei was. But they did not know where he came from. Looking over at Issei, Tsubaki slowly scooted closer to the young man, trying her hardest to suppress her ever-brightening blush. "Hyoudou-kun." Widening his eyes, Issei looked up at Tsubaki. "Huh." Looking away, Tsubaki crossed her arms and looked down on the roof. "When we are finished with Rias's training, perhaps you and I could spend some time together." Issei widened his eyes further. Tsubaki gulped down an unfamiliar nervous lump in her throat, and she held herself tighter. "What do you mean, Tsubaki-senpai?" The young man looked back up at the sky, unaware that Tsubaki's face was a deep red color. Looking back at Issei, Tsubaki scooted closer to him. "Perhaps that we could go out and have a date together." There, she had finally gotten her words out. Her face covered by a crimson blush, Tsubaki struggled to suppress the tingling of her body. Her body once again felt warm, and she felt her heart fluttering. She was experiencing the same feeling she had when she had visited Issei in his room the second time. Sitting up straight from his spot, Issei tilted his head at the fourth popular girl in his school. "A date?" Tsubaki looked over to Issei, trying to maintain her stoic expression. Tilting his head in confusion, Issei rubbed the back of his head. "What is that, some type of food?" Tsubaki's eyes widened in disbelief, and she suppressed the urge to. She didn't even know what she wanted to do at that moment. She knew Issei was naive, but she never would have expected him to be this naive. He really was an innocent person if he didn't even know what dating was. "Partner." "Yeah. Then I'm going to slap you." "What? Why?" "You know what, screw it. Going back to sleep." Issei widened his eyes as Drake abruptly cut off the mind link. Blinking several times in confusion, Issei jumped when he saw that Tsubaki was just a little too close to him. Widening his eyes, Issei was caught off guard when Tsubaki suddenly planted a soft kiss onto his lips. Tsubaki immediately felt her body relax, clearly enjoying her first kiss sealed with Issei. Issei merely sat still, unable to handle this situation now. Hesitatingly releasing her lips from Issei's own, Tsubaki pulled back and crossed her arms, her stoic expression now back on her face. Blinking several times in confusion, Issei remained where he was, trying to figure out what had just happened. Tsubaki, on the other hand, felt more relaxed than ever before. She had successfully obtained her first kiss. Now the easy part was over. The hard part was something she had to worry about later on. And the hard part was trying to explain to Issei what a date was. The next day, at the mountains. Yahoo! Issei widened his eyes as heard an excited yell from another part of the mountains. Wow, they really must be excited to be on the mountains. Indeed. Since he was going to be with Rias and her peerage as well as Sona, Tsubaki, and Saji for 3 weeks, Issei had decided to take some of his belongings with him. All he really had to bring was some clothes and other necessities. As he looked ahead of him, he saw the rest of the devils carrying huge bags of luggage with them. Well, Kiba, Kaneko, and Zenobia were. Saji was carrying Sona and Tsubaki's bags, while Kiba carried Rias and Akino's bags. Looking around his surroundings, Issei allowed a rare smile to cross on his face. The weather's actually nice today. The view is incredible. Bucho, I gathered some herbs. Let's use it for the meal tonight. Issei blinked as he looked at the herbs in Hyoudou's hands. Walking along with the rest of the devils, noticed Saji falling behind him, and he stopped. Why you need some help, Sad-sen? Saji looked up at the young man, and he let a brash smile cross his face. No worries, newbie. I got this. I was just taking a little break, that's all. His smile widening, which was a little forced in Issei's opinion, Saji walked past Issei, his face lowering as the strain of the bags began to wear down on him. We're here, Rias said. Issei widened his eyes at the sight in front of him and the devils. It was a large mansion, also known as the House of Gremory. Inside the House of Gremory, Issei looked around the living room as he praised the appearance of the house. Awesome! He looked over to see Saji putting Sona and Tsubaki's bags away, running inside the house to look around more. Do you like it, Issei? The young man turned to look at a smiling Rias. Issei rubbed the back of his head and looked around the house. It's pretty spacious here, Gremory-senpai. Chuckling a bit, Rias motioned Akino, Kaneko, and Zenobia to come upstairs with her. Looking at the living room curiously, Issei rubbed his head again. This place hasn't changed a bit. Widening his eyes, Issei turned to look at Sona, who adopted a warm smile as she looked around the house. You've been here before, Citri-senpai? Sona looked over at Issei and smiled. But of course, Rias and I are childhood friends. So I am pretty familiar with this house and all of its items. Issei blinked several times and looked around once more. Sona chuckled and followed the rest of the girls upstairs. You should get some rest as while you still can, Issei. After all, you are helping Rias train her peerage. The young man nodded tiredly to the president of the student council as she departed upstairs. Watching Sona go upstairs, Tsubaki looked over to Issei and approached him, crossing her arms. Issei blinked at the motion and rubbed his head. Hyoudou-kun. Come along, Tsubaki. Both Issei and Tsubaki looked up to see Sona looking down at them from upstairs. Yes, Kaicho. Before departing upstairs, Tsubaki planted a soft kiss to Issei's forehead. Blinking in confusion at the sudden kiss of affection from the Shinra devil, Issei watched Tsubaki follow Sona upstairs, and looked all around him. Months. Lesson 1. Sword Training with Hyoudou. Issei and Hyoudou crossed swords as they trained together. Using his black-covered sacred gear along with his blade, Issei blocked Hyoudou's attack smoothly and attempted to counterattack, landing a successful hit. Both of the swordsmen smiled. You're really good, Issei-sen. I'm happy that Bucho is allowing you to train us. Issei smiled a little and rubbed the back of his head. Thanks, Hyoudou-san. Both getting serious again, The two crossed swords once again, trying to overpower the other. Issei had to admit, Hyoudou was exceptionally skilled with a sword. Then again, the Kiba devil was a knight, so it should be expected. Dodging another sword attack, Issei widened his eyes and jumped back just in time to avoid the impalement of many swords. Phew, that was close. They wouldn't have affected you at all, partner. Even so, it doesn't hurt to dodge once in a while. Looking at the swords a little closely, Issei widened his eyes at the design. Are those holy swords? Issei-san. We're not done here. Looking back at Hyoudou, Issei set his face into a serious look, and he narrowed his eyes. Right, let's continue. Lesson 2, Sword Training with Zenovia. Issei winced as he cusically dodged another slash from Zenovia. The second night of Rias's peerage was strong, no doubt about that. However, that she seemed to rely on pure power and strength, rather than using her head. Dodging another swipe, Issei set himself into a battle position, holding his sword tightly. According to what Rias had told him, Zenovia possessed the Durandal, a sword that possessed massive amounts of destructive power. It no doubt synced with Zenovia's battle strategy. Issei narrowed his eyes as he felt an overwhelming destructive force of energy emitting from the sword. Tightening his hold on the sword, Issei waited patiently for Zenovia to control herself. The blue-haired devil narrowed her eyes, and she charged towards Issei, hitting the Durandal roughly against Issei's own sword. Widening his eyes, Issei put more pressure into his battle stance. He kept his stance against Zenovia, surprised at how much strength Zenovia possessed. Lesson 3, Training with Kaneko. Issei blocked Kaneko's punch and her kick. Sparring with Kaneko was a bit more easier than sword training with Zenovia. At least Kaneko didn't look like she wanted to kill him or anything. Issei repeatedly dodged a flurry of punches from Kaneko, very surprised at the small girl's speed. Man, she's fast. The Gremmery's peerage is impressive indeed, partner. But I don't understand why you're so surprised. Dodging another kick from the rook, Issei concentrated as he tried to talk to Drake. I'm surprised because they're really strong, Drake. I think Gremory-senpai made the right decision about changing the number of training days from 10 to 10 days. Definitely wouldn't have been enough, considering how many members Riser has in his peerage. Issei-senpai. Closing his conversation with Drake, Issei widened his eyes as he noticed Kaneko looking a little fatigued. Kaneko-san? Are you all right? He walked over to the white-haired girl, crouching down. Kaneko tried to catch her breath, putting one leg onto the ground. Issei blinked repeatedly and rubbed the back of his head. Do you want to take a little break? The white-haired girl shook her head, struggling to get up. Successfully maintaining her stance, Kaneko swirled her arm around and pointed her fist at Issei. Issei-senpai. Another round. Blinking several times in surprise, Issei settled himself into a battle position. All right, Kaneko-san. In the House of Gremory. Rias, Akino, Yuto, Kaneko, Zenovia, Sona, Tsubaki, Saji, and Issei settled themselves into their seats as they had dinner. The herbs Yuto collected earlier was used for the sake of peace. There were different types of foods that Issei wasn't sure if he was going to finish his first plate. A fuffu. Era. We still have more food left, so eat as much as you want. Akino smiled as she refilled Issei's rice. Tea, thank you, Himejima-senpai. The devils and Issei dug into the food, greatly enjoying the taste. Rubbing her mouth with her napkin, Sona turned to look at Issei. So Hyoudou-san, how was training today? Issei widened his eyes and looked over at Rias's peerage. He looked back over to the Citri devil and rubbed the back of his head, chuckling nervously. It was good. They all really gave me a run for my money, Citri-senpai. Sona smiled in response and closed her eyes. Rias smiled as well and took a sip of her tea. Issei-kuen's so modest. Akino, Sona, Tsubaki, and I know that he wasn't showing his true power. Closing her eyes, Rias crossed her arms. Let's take a bath after the meal. It's an outdoor bath, so it's wonderful. Issei widened his eyes and blinked several times. Outdoor bath? Issei-kun. Would you like to bathe with us? I don't mind. Rias said. Issei widened his eyes and scooted his seat back a little. Rias giggled inwardly. She loved teasing her little kohai. His reaction was so cute. Smiling, she looked over to an amused Akino. How about you, Akino? Akino smiled warmly and looked over to Issei. I don't mind if it's our adorable little kohai. I might want to wash his soft hair. Issei gulped down a nervous lump in his throat, and he willed himself to keep still. Rias started to giggle again. Sona, what about you? It doesn't bother me. What? Issei thought. And you, Tsubaki? Rias asked. Tsubaki looked over to Issei, and although she maintained her stoic expression, a luminescent blush began to form on her face. I do not mind it if Hyoudou-kun joins. Issei really wanted to leave the dinner table at that moment. And he would have if he wasn't so darn polite. Rias smiled wider and turned to look at Zenobia and Kaneko. Zenobia? Kaneko? I don't mind. Yes. That was it. He couldn't do it. Issei stiffened as a lightning aura formed around him, and he transmitted away from the dinner table. Rias and Akino giggled in amusement, Sona smirked and crossed her arms, Tsubaki's blush brightened, Zenobia smiled, and Kaneko looked down at her plate. Saji widened his eyes and he lifted a finger up, looking over at Sona. Kaicho? Can I join you guys? No. The pawn of Sona Citri pouted and scoffed, while Yuto smiled, drinking his tea in amusement. This is better than daytime television. Issei's house. Aisha-chan, could you pass that to me? Sure, Ms. Hyoudou. Hiromi smiled as she was handed the salt container, pouring a little into the pot. Cooking dinner, Hiromi was satisfied that Asia had volunteered to help her. Since Issei was training with the devils, Hiromi had decided to clear her worries for a while. She knew Issei could take care of himself, but not a mother worries. Knock knock. Blinking at the sound, Hiromi looked over to Asia. Asia, would you be a dear and watch the pot? Smiling cheerfully, Asia nodded, and did as Issei's mother suggested to her. Walking out of the kitchen and towards the door, Hiromi opened it, and her brown eyes widened. In front of her was a man with black hair and golden bangs. Behind him was a young woman with black hair and violet eyes, dressed in a black short-sleeve dress, a black skirt, thigh-highs, black high heels, and a black hat with a heart symbol on top. Hiromi narrowed her eyes. Azazel, what are you doing here? The leader of the fallen angels smiled as he bowed in respect. Daughter of Zeus. It's nice to meet you. Explain yourself, Azazel. Azazel chuckled and crossed his arms. Relax, relax. Earlier on, I had asked your son to complete a mission for me. Yes, I remember. And although he succeeded, I'm not exactly thrilled that you almost risked his life. The male fallen angel put on an embarrassed look and put his hands behind his back, whistling contently. Hiromi glared at Azazel, but then her expression changed when she looked behind him to see the black-haired girl. And who is this? Azazel looked behind himself and smiled. Why, this is one of my fallen angels who tried to kill your son. He said a little too cheerfully. Hiromi widened her eyes, and she released a bit of killing intent enough to frighten the human-disguised Rainier. Azazel chuckled and held his hands up in defense. Now calm down. Her trying to kill him was merely a misunderstanding. Besides, she couldn't kill him anyway. Your son is just that strong. Hiromi narrowed her eyes, glaring at Rainier, who wondered if Azazel was trying to screw her over and get her killed, or was just kidding around. Knowing his personality, it was probably both. I'll ask you once more, Azazel. What are you doing here? Smiling, the fallen angel grabbed Rainier and placed the surprised disguised fallen angel in front of him. I'm here to give Issei his compensation. At the House of Gremory. It has been 2 weeks since Rias's peerage had started their training with Issei. They only had one more week, and then they would battle against Riser and his peerage. Rias was actually a little more confident that her peerage would succeed. And she had to admit it to herself, Issei had helped her greatly. Blinking tiredly from his bed, Issei rubbed his eyes and went into the kitchen. Quietly opening the refrigerator, Issei grabbed a carton of orange juice, poured a cup, and drank a sip. Savoring the taste, Issei rubbed his mouth. You're still awake, Ayakun? Pausing in his drinking, Issei turned around to see Rias in the living room. Blinking several times, Issei walked over to the crimson-haired devil. Gremory-senpai? I didn't know you wore glasses. Rias smiled as she fixed her hair. She was dressed in a red negligee while wearing glasses. Occasionally. For some reason, I think more clearly while having my glasses on. Guess living in the human world has rubbed off on me. Tilting his head, Issei looked around the room of the Gremory house. Issei. Looking down at Rias at the call of his name, Issei blinked when the crimson-haired devil smiled at him. Thank you so much for what you have done. I really appreciate it. Rubbing the back of his head, Issei looked away. It was no problem, Gremory-senpai. Can I tell you something though? Widening her eyes, Rias nodded as she listened to what Issei had to say. This riser guy is a phoenix. That means he has instantaneous regeneration. Even if his peerage is defeated, it's going to take a lot of effort to beat him. Rias lowered her head and sighed. She knew Issei understood. After all, he, more or less, had the same amount of knowledge she did about rating games. Riser was known for winning 8 matches in the rating games, and had only lost 2 matches on purpose out of respect. But that there might be a way to beat him, Gremory-senpai. The crimson-haired devil looked up at her Kohai, who held a rare serious look in his eyes. Actually, there might be 2 ways to beat him. You need to have a lot of power first, and then you need to have enough stamina to last the battle. A phoenix has instant regeneration, but that doesn't mean their mind does. Blinking several times in amazement, Rias settled herself and crossed her legs. So you're saying that we must break his will? Regaining his usual shy demeanor in a flash, Issei rubbed the back of his head. Well, that IT sounds kind of rough when you put it that way, Gremory-senpai. But yeah. Rias hummed as she put her hand under her chin in thought. Next morning. Come on, newbie. Let us see. What do you mean, Saji-san? The devils of the Occult Research Club and the Student Council all stood outside as they watched a member of the latter pleading with Issei. Saji smiled as he pointed to Issei. Come on, man. Show us your sacred gear. Issei blinked several times in confusion. But why? Because I heard you have a dragon sealed within yours too. We're practically twins, newbie. Issei rose an eyebrow and blinked again. Twins. Although I detest myself for saying this, Albion and I look like twins compared to you and this devil. It's all right, Hyoudou-san. You may show him. Sona said. Issei looked at the Citri devil, and then back at Saji, who nodded in excitement. Getting a little nervous from all the stares he was receiving, Issei complied. A crimson aura enveloped the young man as his sacred gear started to manifest itself onto his left arm. Saji widened his eyes and crossed his arms, before pausing in confusion. Wait, why it's black? Issei looked down to see the black-armored golden-jeweled version of the boosted gear. Concentrating his energy, Issei closed his eyes, and the black color faded, allowing the boosted gear to regain its crimson shade. That was weird. I thought the boosted gear only changed when I used my blade. I wasn't even trying to summon my blade this time. Interesting. Later that night, resting comfortably on the branches of a tree, Issei sighed as he watched the bright stars. Something wrong, partner? That I guess I'm just thinking about the rating game. We've been training with the Occult Research Club for 3 weeks. I'd just hope all of the training was worth it. It was worth it, partner. I'm not usually one for giving out praise, but you have actually done well in training these devils. Smiling a little at the praise, Issei looked up at the sky, getting a little tired from looking at the stars. A day before the decisive battle. Ayase-san, you're home. Issei widened his eyes as he was glomped by an excited Asia. Honey. He was then hugged by his mother. Issei sighed as he was embraced the two. 3 weeks training at the mountains and he was finally back home. After leaving the mountains, the devils had gone back to their homes, and Issei had teleported back to his home. Going upstairs to his room, Issei put his bags down and turned around only to jump back in surprise. A black-haired woman with crow-like wings dressed in an sand M outfit stared back moodily at the young man in front of her. Issei blinked several times in confusion, and he lifted a finger up. What are you doing here? It was the very same fallen angel that had tried to kill him, unsuccessfully. What was she doing in his house? The last time Issei had seen her was when Azazel himself appeared and took her away. So what was she doing in his room? Rainier narrowed her violet eyes and crossed her arms. Azazel-sama brought me over here. Why am I not surprised? Why? Because I'm serving as payment from Azazel-sama. For when you helped defeat Kokobile. Repayment? I don't understand. Rainier scoffed and held herself tightly. Issei didn't know if he was mistaken, but he could have sworn there was a faint blush on Rainier's face. Why is she blushing? Looks like you're going to have to sleep on the couch again, partner. The day of the decisive battle. Issei sighed as he walked over to Kuo Academy. Today was the day of the battle between Rias and Riser. The young man hoped all of that training was worth it. As he reached near the school, he heard a familiar voice call out to him. Welsh Dragon. Widening his brown eyes, Issei turned around to see Valley Lucifer with his hands in his pockets. Valley. The two rivals stood across from each other. Did you get the little surprise at home? Yeah. I wish Azazel would have told me first. So what are you doing here? 30 minutes later, in the student council room. Knock knock. Taking her attention away from the screen showing the rating game, Sona looked towards the door. Come in. The door to the student council opened, revealing Issei. Sona and Tsubaki widened their eyes. Hyoudou-san. Hyoudou-kun. Issei rubbed the back of his head and walked towards the two devils. Hey, how's the rating game going? I didn't miss a lot, did I? Sona smiled and looked over to the screen. Not really. I'm impressed with Rias's peerage. Her rook had managed to incapacitate Riser's rook, allowing Akino to finish her and the 3 pawns. However, Issei looked over to the Citri devil. Kaneko was defeated by Yubaluna later on as well as Akino. Although Kaneko had actually seemed to be giving Riser's queen a little bit of trouble. Her strength has definitely increased. If Yubaluna hadn't used her Phoenix Tears, Kaneko and Akino would have been able to defeat her. Issei widened his eyes and he looked back to the screen. Phoenix Tears? So the only ones left are Hyoudou-san, Zenobia-san, and Gremory-senpai. Tsubaki nodded and crossed her arms. Yes. And the only ones left on Riser's side is the bishop, the queen, and Riser himself. Issei gained a serious look in his eyes as he watched the screen. I hope Hyoudou-san remembers what I gave him. On the battlefield. Rias versus Riser. Rias, resign. You will make your Ota-sama and Surzek-sama who are watching from another place look bad. You have no more choices. Your last remaining pieces are sore and weakened, so they are of no use to you anymore. Everyone already has foreseen the outcome. It's checkmate, Rias. Rias narrowed her blue-green eyes darkly as she stood with Yuto and Zenobia. Akino and Kaneko had already been eliminated, but she was proud of her queen and rook. The training with Issei had improved them definitely. She looked behind her to see a fatigued Yuto and Zenobia. The knight swallowed a lump in his throat, and then he smiled. Ucho, did I think Aisen really came through for us? Rias widened her eyes. What does he mean? Smiling wider, Yuto reached into his BRST pocket, pulling out a small edible treat. Riser rose an eyebrow. A snack that has the shape of an eagle? Are you outside of your mind? It's not time to eat. It's time for you to lose. Grabbing another eagle-shaped treat out of his BRST pocket, Yuto smiled and tossed it to Zenobia, who caught it and looked at it cautiously. Rias turned around in caution. Yuto? What is that you're about to eat? Looking over at his master, Yuto held up the treat. Something that Ayase-san gave to me. Flashback, at the mountains. It was the day of the battle between Rias and Riser. As the devils got ready to transport into their magic circle, a voice suddenly called out to them. Hey, Yuto-san. Yuto Kiba widened his eyes and turned around to see Issei. Blinking, the pretty boy of Kuo Academy walked over to the young man. Is there something you wanted, Aisen? Issei nodded and he reached into his bag. Seconds later, he pulled out 2 eagle-shaped snacks. Yuto rose an eyebrow as Issei held them out for him. What's this? Letting another smile form on his face, Issei stood up and put his hands behind his head. After watching a lot of the raiding games featuring the Phoenix clan, I've noticed that they use Phoenix tears to regenerate their abilities a lot. Besides their own skills and Riser's regeneration, the Phoenix tears seems to help them a lot. Yuto widened his eyes and looked down at the treats. What is the purpose of this? Yuto jumped back a little as a pool of lightning bolts surrounded Issei. The brown-haired young man smiled and took a step back. Use it carefully, okay? End of flashback. Smiling widely, Yuto engulfed the treat, and instantly his energy returned. He felt better than before. Rias widened her eyes as she sensed Yuto's returning vitality. Zenobia blinked in confusion before she hesitatingly consumed the treat herself. And in an instant, she too felt her energy returning. Riser rose an eyebrow and crossed his arms. What's going on? Their energy. It's regenerating. In the student council, Sona and Tsubaki widened their eyes and looked over at Issei, who smiled at the screen. The Citri Devil rose an eyebrow and crossed her arms. Hyoudou-san. What did you do? Tsubaki looked back at the screen in confusion. What did Yuto Kiba mean when he mentioned Hyoudou-kun? What was the purpose of that treat? On the battlefield, Zenobia smiled as she held her sword tightly. She could feel her strength returning to its fullest. Yuto smiled as well, holding his sword tightly. Riser narrowed his eyes at Rias. So what? Just because your knights have regained their strength, it doesn't change the fact that you have no chance of winning this fight. To prove his point, Riser emitted a pair of pyrokinetic wings out of his back. Narrowing his eyes and gritting his teeth, Riser charged towards the three devils. Rias widened her eyes and summoned a pool of demonic energy to the Phoenix Devil's face. Riser's eyes twitched as his face regenerated instantly, and he flew faster, until he came face to face with a holy sword coming towards his way. Riser widened his eyes as he was pierced by the holy sword known as Durandal. Zenobia frowned darkly at the Phoenix Devil, releasing her newly rejuvenated destructive power, along with the power of Durandal. Riser gritted his teeth as he tried to eject himself off of the sword. Next to Zenobia, Yuto smiled as he closed his eyes. Suddenly many swords appeared from above the battlefield, embedding themselves into the ground. Riser screamed in pain as the holy swords pierced through him. In the student council, they're doing great. I think Gremry-senpai and her group are going to win this one. Sona looked at the screen in awe. They're actually succeeding. Closing his eyes, Issei smiled softly. Yuto-san and Zenobia-san both have holy swords. My grandpa told me that holy swords are powerful against devils. Combining Yuto-san's blade blacksmith and Zenobia-san's Durandal was a good idea. Tsubaki blinked in shock as she looked over at Issei. Hyoudou-kun. Back at the battlefield, Riser struggled to regenerate himself as he felt more holy swords piercing him. He tried to avoid the swipes from Zenobia's Durandal. Far away from him, Yubaluna's eyes widened in shock, and a girl with blonde hair and dark blue eyes stood in disbelief. Oni-sama that is losing? Riser coughed out a spurt of blood as he collapsed onto the floor. This is impossible. How could I be beaten? How? He held his stomach, and he looked up angrily at Yuto and Zenobia, who held their swords firmly. Coughing out more blood, Riser slammed his head onto the ground and his body converted into orbs, disappearing completely. Riser Phoenix-sama has lost the rating game. Rias Gremry-sama wins. In the Occult Research Club room, Rias, Akino, Kiba, Kaneko, Zenobia, a silver-haired maid, and a red-haired male that looked very similar to Rias, mingled in the room. Rias smiled cheerfully. It was hard, but that we won. The members of the Occult Research Club smiled. Yuto smiled wider and looked down on the ground. Yes, we succeeded. All of that training really paid off. Thanks to Issei-sen. Issei? Is this the one you told me about, my cute little sister? The red-haired man asked Rias. Rias blushed and pouted. Oni-sama. Surzex Lucifer, the Crimson Satan, smiled as he crossed his arms. So when do I meet this Issei Hyoudou? Knock knock. Rias looked over at the door. Come in. The door opened, revealing Issei Hyoudou himself, rubbing the back of his head. He looked at the Occult Research Club and smiled shyly. Good job, Hyoudou. I. He was cut off when he was enveloped into a hug from Rias and Aquino. Struggling to catch his breath, Issei widened his eyes when he saw two new people occupying the Occult Research Club. There was a man who looked like an exact male version of Rias, and a silver-haired maid. Who are these two? That red-haired guy. His power is amazing. It is to expected of a Mao partner. Issei Hyoudou. It's nice to meet you. Issei tilted his head at Surzex, who put his hand out to Issei. Nodding in politeness, Issei shook the man's hand. You don't look just like Gremry-senpai. Are you her brother? Yes, indeed I am. And you are a demigod, are you not? Issei rubbed the back of his head and nodded shyly. Surzex chuckled and put his hands behind his back. The brother of Rias stepped away to introduce himself and the maid next to him. My name is Surzex. Surzex Lucifer. And this is my wife, Graphia Lucifuge. Surzex twitched as he was suddenly hit by a harisen from the maid now known as Graphia. The maid adopted a light scowl on her face as she glared at Surzex. Regaining her stoic look, Graphia bowed politely. It's a pleasure to meet you, Issei Hyoudou. Issei widened his eyes at the maid's attack on her supposed husband, but he kept quiet. He had the strange feeling that Rias's family was just a little unique. Issei's room. So the daughter of the Gremry clan won the raiding game. All thanks to you, Tsisima. Issei rose an eyebrow at the added suffix to his name, and he looked curiously at Rainier, who was in the form of her innocent schoolgirl persona. Sama? I'm not your master. I'm no one's master, Rainier-san. Rainier looked away and she crossed her arms, huffing. Blinking several times in confusion, Issei laid upon his bed, thinking seriously about what had occurred between him and Valley. Flashback. Walking across from each other, the Welsh dragon and the vanishing dragon were silent. Smirking with his arms crossed, Valley looked over to Issei. The meeting between the three factions is near, Welsh dragon. It will certainly be interesting. Issei frowned softly and looked over to his rival, who looked ahead of himself. Our battle is also approaching. The Welsh dragon stopped in his pace and looked at his rival. Our battle? You want to start our fight so soon, Valley? Valley shrugged and smiled. As a fellow dragon, I'm merely warning you on what's about to begin, Issei Hyoudou. Get ready that I won't be so soft because we share a legacy together. The Welsh dragon and the vanishing dragon have fought countless times for many years. It's been a constant state of friction between the two heavenly dragons, and it seems that destiny has chosen us to carry their legacy. Issei frowned and looked down at the ground. End of flashback. Issei sighed as he rubbed the back of his head. He just couldn't catch a break, could he? The battle between the Welsh dragon and the vanishing dragon was indeed close. Blinking for a moment, Issei then smiled and sat up on his bed. Our rivalry may be our legacy, but I'm sure Valley and I learned a few tricks since the past possessors of the sacred gears. When we fight, I'm sure one of us is going to be surprised on what we do in our battle. It's definitely going to be a great battle between us. Issei widened his eyes when he felt Rainier, in her fallen angel form, cuddling next to him. Our Rainier-san. Issei-sama's so warm. Draig. You don't even need to say it, partner. I'm just as lost as you are right now. So, Tsubaki-senpai, what is a date anyway? Tsubaki nearly tripped herself and almost dropped the papers she was assigned by Sona. She didn't expect this to happen. Of all the questions Issei's naive mind could come up with, it just had to be that one. Perfect. Frankly, Tsubaki assumed that Issei had forgotten about her suggestion for them to go out on a date together, after that incident of Issei assuming that a date was some type of food. Well, technically Issei wasn't exactly wrong in his question. A date was a type of food, but that's beside the point. Struggling to maintain her composure, Tsubaki placed her papers on the desk and crossed her arms, looking down at Issei. Hyoudou-kun. A date is an event where two people spend time together. They merely go out together and enjoy each other's company. Issei, sitting on the couch in the student council room, rubbed the back of his head. Oh, is that all? He tilted his head and looked up at the ceiling. So that's what a date is. But why did Tsubaki-senpai ask me out on a date earlier on? Partner, what the hell, I might as well explain it to you. For some strange reason, the Shinra devil seems to harbor affection for you. She does? But why? She kissed you, baka? Issei winced at the Welsh dragon's outrage, and rubbed his head. Shaking his head to clear his thoughts, Issei looked up at Tsubaki and adopted a thoughtful look on his face. Tsubaki! Tsubaki and Issei looked up to see Sona standing by the door. Kaicho! Citri-senpai! The Citri devil crossed her arms, maintaining her strict expression. The time for the meeting between the three factions is about to begin. We should get going soon. Yes, Kaicho. Tsubaki looked down towards Issei and bent down to kiss his cheek. We will talk later, Hyoudou-kun. Outside of Kuo Academy. Valley. The Welsh dragon and vanishing dragon stood across from each other. Valley looked at Issei's school and crossed his arms. The conference between the three factions is today, Welsh dragon. Are you ready? Issei frowned as his and Valley's auras started to manifest and envelop them. Something tells me that the conference isn't going to be the only thing that happens today. Albion. Draig. Let's go, Welsh dragon. Don't want to keep them waiting. The new school building of Kuo Academy. Issei and Valley opened the door, and the Welsh dragon widened his eyes at the appearance of the items in the room. The tables in the room were absolutely gorgeous, and the air surrounding the people in the room. Issei looked to see Rias, Aquino and the rest of the peerage, Sona, Tsubaki, Surzex, Azazel, and two new figures. The first figure was a male angel with blonde hair and green eyes. He had 12 golden wings jutting out from his back. The other figure was a girl who somewhat resembled Sona, as they both had black hair and violet eyes. The girl had a childlike body, albeit with large biarthas. As he listened to the devils, fallen angels, and angels conversing, he learned the girl's name was Seraphol. Issei noticed the tension in the room, and he stood off to the side, crossing his arms. Valley walked over to another area next to Azazel, crossing his arms as he waited for the meeting to begin. Issei narrowed his eyes as he contacted Drake. The meeting between the devils, fallen angels, and angels. I'm not really sure if I'm supposed to be involved in this event. I'm neither of these races, so I have no idea why Azazel told Valley to bring me here. You're right. However, the host of Albion seemed eager for something. Perhaps the reason for you coming here was because something else is going to commence. It seems that the legacy between Albion and I is going to start soon. Issei inwardly sighed as the meeting had finally begun. Both he and Valley knew what was going to happen. The meeting between the three factions was merely used as a basis in order to sign a treaty. Issei didn't particularly have any thoughts about the whole situation, and he already knew Valley didn't care about it either. So Issei kept quiet throughout the meeting, listening clearly to what was discussed. 30 minutes later, Issei widened his eyes as he suddenly felt numerous amounts of energy surges. Detecting them from outside, Issei walked over to the window, and he narrowed his eyes. Magicians dressed in black robes fired magic bullets towards the school building. They're not doing any damage at all, but they're still going at it. Azazel clicked his teeth as he walked over to Issei to explain. Those guys are so-called magicians. It's a kind of magic that was originally interpreted from the magic system of devils by the legendary magician Merlin Ambrosius and reconstructed as sorcerer. From the power of the magic they're emitting, I'd guess that they each have the magic power of a mid-class devil. Issei narrowed his eyes and looked back out the window. Azazel smiled and turned to look at Valley. Hey Valley. What is it? You and Issei go catch the enemy's attention outside. If both the Vanishing Dragon and the Welsh Dragon come out at the front, it'll disrupt their strategy a little. Also, something may move about. Valley smirked and looked over to Issei, who frowned in response. So he and Valley were working together once again? Balance breaker. Vanishing Dragon balance breaker. Smirking wider, Valle concentrated his energy, and a snow-white aura manifested around his body, before morphing into a body armor that emitted a pure white radiance. Smiling within his armor, Valle turned to look at Issei. "Are you coming, Welsh Dragon?" Issei closed his eyes, concentrating his energy as well. Welsh Dragon over Booster. The familiar red armor enveloped Issei entirely, indicating that he was now in his full-powered balance breaker form, the scale male. The rivals looked at each other, and then they turned towards the window. Valle walked over to the window and opened it up, rushing out of the sky. Following him, Issei rushed out of the window, charging a red sphere of energy and firing it towards the crowd of magicians. Valle smirked at his rival's power, and emitted his power, causing shock waves to emerge and trample the magicians. Issei looked up at his rival as he punched another magician. He's strong. He widened his eyes when he saw magic circles appearing afterwards, the elimination of many magicians, and more of them appeared. This is going to take a while. 30 minutes later. Issei sighed as he defeated the large number of magicians. Man, that was a lot. They weren't hard to beat, but still. Partner, look around you. Do you notice something odd? Issei widened and looked around his surroundings. Valle was missing. Where on earth did the vanishing dragon go to? The Welsh dragon narrowed his eyes as he tried to detect the vanishing dragon's energy. Narrowing his eyes further, Issei charged his energy and flew towards the energy source. In front of Kuo Academy. The devils and Azazel stood in front of the Kuo Academy, their eyes widening in sheer astonishment at the appearance of the vanishing dragon. I must admit I expected this. But I never would have thought you would betray me so soon, Valle. Clad in his shining white armor, Valle crossed his arms and sneered down at Azazel. You're right, Azazel. Humph, for one of my followers to do something like this. Valle lifted his mask off his helmet, revealing his face. I've always wanted to test my power, Azazel. You of all people should know that about me. Azazel narrowed his eyes. I encouraged you to become strong, Valle. Not to cause trouble that will bring about despair on the world. That means nothing. I just want to fight eternally. Did I see? Like I said, I knew that you would leave my side. Ever since we met, you always showed that you wanted to fight strong opponents. You know me so well, don't you, Azazel? Valle, Azazel, and the rest of the devils turned to see the Welsh dragon speeding towards the former. Rias widened her eyes. Issei Hyoudou. Stopping in front of his rival, Issei narrowed his eyes, noticing the growing tension between his rival and Azazel. What's going on, Valle? Staring at his rival for a moment, Valle let out an amused chuckle. Welsh dragon Issei Hyoudou, as a fellow dragon, let me tell you who I am. My name is Valle Lucifer. I'm a descendant of the Mao Lucifer who had perished long ago. However, I'm also a half-breed of mixed blood born from a father who was a devil and a human mother. That's how I obtained the Vanishing Dragon's sacred gear, because I'm half-human. Issei stood still as he listened to his rival's backstory. Valle smiled and pointed to Issei. We sure do have a lot in common, don't we, Welsh Dragon? We're both hosts of the heavenly dragons, our armors are similar in appearance, and lastly that we're both half-human. But that the only difference is that you're a demigod, grandson of Zeus. The members of the Occult Research Club and the 3 members of the Student Council widened their eyes in absolute shock as they stared dumbfounded at Issei. What? Thought Rias. Issei Hyoudou. Aquino mentally exclaimed. Hyoudou-kun? Tsubaki thought in shock. Azazel sighed as he looked over at the Welsh dragon. Rias trembled as she looked over at Issei, and then Valle. Issei, a descendant of Zeus himself? And then the Vanishing Dragon, a descendant of the original Lucifer. The Welsh dragon and the Vanishing Dragon flared their auras in unison. Valle, do you really want to fight me that badly? Humph, what kind of stupid question is that? Issei sighed and looked over at his school, thinking seriously. Narrowing his eyes, he looked back over at Valle and pointed to the school. We won't fight here. I won't allow anyone to get hurt. It's like you said, the legacy you and I shared is between you and me only. Valle smirked and crossed his arms. Fine by me. Lead the way. Breathing out a sigh, Issei deactivated his scale mail, reverting to his normal form. If we're going to fight, we might as well conserve our energy. So transform back into your normal form, Valley. Humph. I don't take orders from you, Welsh Dragon. But this fight could be worthwhile, so I'll concede for now. Reverting to his original form, Valley sneered and put his hands in his pockets. Looking at his rival for a moment, Issei looked down at Tsubaki and he sent her a smile. Tsubaki-senpai. After all of this mess is over, let's go out on our date together, okay? Tsubaki remained in her stance as her eyes widened and her body stiffened. Her mouth opened wide, and her stoic expression disappeared completely. The Shinra devil was completely shocked. She didn't anticipate this at all. Bibaka Hyoudou-kun. How could he say something so boldly at a time like this? Issei. Issei smiled and rubbed the back of his head in his familiar shy demeanor. I don't know how long my battle with Vala will be, but I promised Tsubaki-senpai. Our date will happen. Tsubaki couldn't respond. Her mouth felt dry, and she felt her heart beat faster than ever. She was so astounded by Issei's declaration that her face had reddened into a full crimson blush. How could Hyoudou-kun say something like that? Tsubaki felt the familiar fluttering in her stomach, and she started to feel a little lightheaded. Of all the actions she had ever seen Issei Hyoudou do, Tsubaki would have never expected him to do this. Hyoudou-kun. His face turning back into a serious frown, Issei looked over to Valley, nodding to him. Alright, I'm ready. A lightning aura formed around Issei, and he looked to his rival. Grab my shoulder. Valley rose an eyebrow at the request, but he complied. In an instant, the Welsh dragon and vanishing dragon transmitted away from Quo Academy. The devils and Azazel all stood in silence. Tsubaki tried to settle herself, completely amazed on what Issei had just done. Tsubaki Fukukeichu. Are you blushing? Quiet, Saji. Training ground at Mount Olympus. A pool of electricity bolts emitted from the ground, and as the bolts sparked rapidly, a flashing light brightened the entire area. The light faded, and the Welsh dragon and vanishing dragon appeared, the rivals standing across from each other. Issei stood silently, very cautious on how to deal with Valley. He and Valley, despite the similarities that the latter had pointed out before they teleported to Mount Olympus, had rival sacred gears. The boosted gear had the ability to double the user's power every 10 seconds, while the Divine Dividing Gear had the ability to divide the power of its opponents by half after coming into contact with them every 10 seconds. The halved powers are then added to the user's own powers. Any particular reason you picked this arena, Welsh Dragon? Issei looked around the familiar area in response to Vala's question. 12 years ago, when his mother had taken him to Mount Olympus for the first time, this arena was where he had gone through the most intense training sessions ever. However, the reason he had brought himself and Valley to this arena was because he was sure that there would be no people around them. Because I'm the only one who ever used this area as my training place. None of my relatives ever used it, so there's no chance of anyone coming here. Valley smirked and crossed his arms. So sentimental. Issei frowned in response, but he kept quiet. As far as he knew, Valley was no doubt going to be his toughest opponent yet. After all, both of them were the hosts of the two heavenly dragons. But he didn't want to use his sacred gear yet. That could be saved for last, especially since he knew what Valley's sacred gear did. Hey Valley, what do you say we do a warm-up first? Valley rose an eyebrow in response. Warm-up? The Welsh dragon nodded in response. If we use our sacred gears instantaneously, it's not really going to be much of a good fight, right? Before leaving Quo Academy, Issei had heard the conversation between Azazel and Valley. Valley had wanted to fight strong opponents, wanting to fight for eternity. That was another thing that differentiated him from Issei. Although Issei had fought monsters since he was a child, he had never gained the aspect of becoming a battle maniac. Considering his rival's words, Valley scoffed. It seems you're not as soft as I thought. Bolts of lighting surrounding him, Issei lifted his arms up and let out a great bellow as he revealed his power. The dark sky above them flashed as lightning poured downwards, enveloping Issei entirely. Valis smirked at his rival's demonstration of his power, and he too let out a scream as he summoned his demonic power. The power of the Welsh dragon and the vanishing dragon shook the training ground of Mount Olympus, causing cracks to appear in the ground. Kuo Academy. After the Welsh dragon and the vanishing dragon had departed from Kuo Academy, the devils went on to the school ground. The armies of the three factions were seen carrying away the corpses of the dead magicians, and cleaning up the mess from the battles taken place. Serzex, Seraphal, and Michael, the leader of the angels, were seen giving orders to their subordinates. Looking to see his little sister and the rest of the devils and Azazel. Approaching the school ground, Serzex raised his hand up. "Ah, good, you're safe. Thank goodness." He looked at Azazel, and his eyes gained a somber air about them. "Azazel, what happened to that arm?" The leader of the fallen angels looked down to see his former left arm, which was now a stump. "I was caught by Katlia and nearly self-destructed along with her. I had no choice but to cut it off." "I see. Her matter was a problem on the devil's side. About that wound." Azazel silenced the devil with a wave of his hand. "It's not necessary that I also caused trouble with Valley." "So he betrayed you?" "From the start, he was a guy that poured into only power. If you look at it from the results, it's possible to understand and say, ah, I see. However, it's my responsibility that I didn't stop it from happening." Serzex noted the lonely look on Azazel's face, and he lowered his head. His blue-green eyes then widened as he remembered something. "Where is Issei Hyoudou? Is he not with you?" "That he went to fight Valley. It seems that the Welsh dragon and the vanishing dragon are starting their legacy once again." The leader of the angels walked over to the devil and the fallen angel. "Now then, I'm returning to heaven at once and will work on a plan for the matter of peace and countermeasures against the Cows Brigade. I'm sorry, I had arranged things this time. We who set up the place of this conference feel ashamed." Serzex said as he apologized to Michael. "Serzex, please don't feel so responsible. As for me, I'm just glad that the three great powers are walking on the path to peace together, you know? With this, useless quarrels should also decrease. Well, subordinates who don't agree with that will also leave." Azazel sarcastically remarked. "That is inevitable, because we've hated each other for a long time. However, it should change even a little from now on. The problem is the Cows Brigade that we can't assume is good." "Then let's cooperate and discuss from now on regarding that matter," said Serzex. "Then I'll return to heaven at once. I'll come back immediately, so we'll conclude the formal peace agreement at that time," Michael stated. Azazel nodded in response and turned to look at his troops. "I have chosen peace. The fallen angels won't fight with the angels and devils at all from now on. Those who are dissatisfied with this may leave. However, I'll kill you without reservation the next time we meet. Only those who want to follow come with me. We will live for the sake of Governor Azazel till the day we die." Azazel smiled at his subordinates' loyalty and nodded to them in thanks. July 20XX AD. Heaven's representative head angel Michael, Governor Azazel of the fallen angel central organization Grigori, Underworld's representative Mao Serzex Lucifer. With these representatives of the three factions, a peace treaty was signed. Thereafter, disputes between the three great powers were prohibited in the framework of cooperation. This treaty adopted its name from our school, which became its stage, and was called the Ku Treaty. Training ground at Mount Olympus. Both at their maximum power, without their sacred gears, Issei and Valley charged towards each other in a great burst of speed. Valley narrowed his eyes and charged faster, throwing a rapid barrage of kicks at Issei, who quickly dodged every one of them. Waiting for the right moment, Issei counterattacked with a series of his own kicks. Rearing their fists back, Issei and Vala's fists made contact, causing a series of shock waves to emit on the training ground. Cracks appeared more into the ground, and parts of the mountains above the training ground began to crumble. Flying back from each other, the Welsh dragon and the vanishing dragon exchanged kicks and fists once again, each struggling to overpower the other. "Man, he's strong. Humph, not too shabby." Narrowing his eyes, Valley headbutt Issei, landing a punch that caused the Welsh dragon to soar backwards. Rushing after him, Valle was about to continue his assault, until Issei quickly reacted and kneed Valle in the stomach. Valle coughed out spittle, as he suddenly felt bolts of lightning paralyzing him. His blue eyes twitching at the fact that he could not move, Valle widened his eyes as Issei brought his fist up, uppercutting Valle up into the air. Recovering from his paralysis, Valle maintained his flight and charged towards a rushing Issei. The Welsh dragon and the vanishing dragon were completely in sync with their assault blows. Rearing his fist back, Valle sent another fist towards Issei before the latter successfully caught it. Valle reared his other hand back, prompting the same result. Pushing their fists forward in order to attempt to overpower the other, Issei and Valle charged their auras, causing pools of blue electricity bolts surrounding the former's crimson aura and crimson electricity sparks surrounding the latter's silver-blue aura to emerge outwardly. Gritting their teeth, Issei and Valle growled at each other and slammed their heads together, causing bolts of lightning to illuminate from their bodies. As their auras increased in size, the two warriors headbutted again, causing even more bolts of electricity. Their auras brightened in intensity, causing the ground to edge apart. Letting go of each other's fists, Issei and Valle flew back from each other, and the latter attempted to send a kick. Issei saw through it and blocked it with his wrist. Sending his wrist forward, Issei attempted to punch Valle, who evaded it just in time, and slammed his hands into the ground to keep his balance. Issei widened his eyes and moved his head to the side just in time to avoid a flying kick from Valle. Narrowing his eyes, Issei retaliated by sending his knee up into Valle's stomach. Flying back from the attack, Valle maintained his stance and got back into position. Seeing Issei run towards him, Valle planted his fist into the ground and used his balance to trip Issei. Falling down onto the ground, Issei regained his balance and narrowly avoided a punch from Valle, who growled in response. Flying up into the air, Issei edged down towards Valle and lifted both of his hands up into the air, and brought down both of his fists together, sending a crushing slam onto Valle's head. Issei then sent another kick, until Valle grabbed his leg and threw him onto the ground. Grunting at the assault, Issei widened his eyes and avoided a stomp on the ground from Valle. Getting back into his battle position, Issei narrowly avoided another kick from Valle, and, dodging the kick just in time, Issei swept Valle's other leg, causing the two to fall down and drift midair. His moves that they're incredible. Haha, he truly is my rival. Finally, someone who's actually a challenge. Regaining their footing, Issei and Valle clashed knees, exchanging punches and kicks once again. Flying away from Issei, Valle stepped back and sent out a flurry of demonic energy barrages. Issei quickly avoided them and continued to charge towards Valle. Putting more power into his energy barrages, Valle increased the effort, causing clouds of smoke to emerge due to the intensity of his demonic energy. The smoke cleared, revealing Issei, who was nearing faster towards Valle, who stopped his energy barrages. Flying up into the air, Valle lifted his hand up, charging a crimson energy beam. Issei narrowed his eyes and he lifted his hand up as well, charging a golden energy beam. Narrowing their eyes, the rivals shot their energy attacks towards each other, causing a colossal beam struggle to begin. Gritting his teeth, Issei flew towards his rival, causing the beam struggle to expand into a colossal sphere struggle. As the sphere grew into a great size, the Welsh dragon and the vanishing dragon charged more energy into their attacks, causing a cataclysmic explosion to emerge within the training ground of Mount Olympus. A huge smoke cloud emerged, but then it slowly disappeared, revealing a smiling Issei and a smirking Valle. So, Valle, are you ready for round 2? Humph. Are you that eager to die, Issei Hyoudou? Issei smiled confidently and pointed to himself. No way. I made a promise to Tsubaki-senpai that we could have our date together after this whole mess is over. I don't intend on dying in this battle anytime soon. Valle smirked at his rival's declaration. Then I sure hope you're ready. Same to you. Vanishing Dragon Balance Breaker. Welsh Dragon Overbooster. The calls from the dragons of their sacred gears allowed Issei and Valle to transform into their balance breaker states. Pools of colossal energy began to emit around the training ground of Mount Olympus. Sealed into their respective armors, the Welsh dragon and the vanishing dragon stood proudly, their powers soaring to new heights. Increasing the sizes of their auras, the rivals charged towards each other, clashing their fists and knees together. Despite the words they exchanged with each other, the Welsh dragon and the vanishing dragon could not deny that they were greatly enjoying their battle. It was just as Valley had said. The two heavenly dragons were fierce rivals, considered to be the of the highest class of dragons, only below the dragon god and the true dragon. Although the bodies of Draig and Albion were destroyed, their rivalry lived on through the sacred gears known as the boosted gear and the divine dividing gear. Yes, it would seem that Issei Hyoudou and Valley Lucifer were not exempt from inheriting the long legacy between the two heavenly dragons. Rearing his fist back, Issei attempted to punch Valley, who blocked with his own fist. Gritting his teeth, Issei then headbutt Valley, causing both of their helmets to shatter apart. Flying away in order to escape from Issei's hold on him, Valley charged a pool of his demonic aura and flew towards Issei, who charged his own aura as well, flying towards Valley. The hosts of the two heavenly dragons flew towards each other, causing parts of their armors to shatter. Both widening their eyes in pain, Issei and Valley flew back unsteadily while holding their abdomens. That punch really did it for me. Phew. Gah. Humph. Very impressive. Just what I would have expected from my rival. The two were so engrossed into their thoughts that they failed to notice two jewels falling down above them. An emerald-colored jewel was falling towards Valley, while a blue-colored jewel was falling towards Issei. Issei and Valley widened their eyes as they looked down to see that the jewels on their armored right hands were smashed completely. Widening their eyes further, Issei and Valley were too late to evade, as the emerald-colored jewel of the Welsh dragon embedded itself into the armor of the divine dividing gear, and the blue-colored jewel of the vanishing dragon embedded itself within the right hand of Issei's boosted gear. Both rivals suddenly let out a gasp of pain, as they felt something throbbing inside their hearts. Issei gripped his stomach, trying to figure out where the pain was coming from. A silver aura sprang forth, wrapping around Issei's right arm. What's happening? Gwa. Issei looked over in shock to Valley clutching his abdomen in pain. Issei widened his eyes when he saw the wings of the divine dividing gear starting to glow a familiar crimson aura. What's happening? Good. Gwafhai. Darn it. So Draig's feeling it too. Even Albion. Valley. Remove that jewel out of your armor. Quickly. Valley complied and attempted to remove the jewel of the Welsh dragon, but upon touching it, his hands suddenly burned from the intense heat. Gah. Draig. What did your idiotic host do? Quiet, Albion. Issei, Valley, and the two heavenly dragons shouted out in great pain as a colossal explosion emitted from their explosive auras. And then the light faded. The smoke and light cleared, revealing Issei in his scale mail armor. Breathing heavily from the leftover pain, Issei struggled to get up and almost tripped himself. What had happened? Vanishing dragon power is taken. Widening his eyes at the call, Issei looked down to his right hand to see a silver-white version of his boosted gear. His eyes widening further, Issei noticed that there was a blue jewel inside the white gear. Power is taken? Ugh. Issei looked up to see his rival struggling to pick himself up. Clad in his armor, Valley narrowed his eyes. We're not done here, Welsh dragon. Issei narrowed his eyes, but then he looked closely, and his brown eyes widened. What's this? Welsh dragon power is taken. Valley widened his eyes in surprise at the call, and he looked up to see the right light wing of his divine dividing gear was now emitting a crimson aura around it. The blue aura of the divine dividing gear was now crimson red. Widening his eyes in shock and slow anger, Valley gritted his teeth and set his sights over to Issei, who looked on in amazement. Issei looked down at the silver shining gear on his right hand. Dividing gear. He then looked up at the crimson right wing of Valley's divine dividing. Divine booster. Issei widened his eyes. Powers that they switched. No wait. Our powers exchanged. This isn't good. Valley narrowed his eyes, unable to keep calm about what just happened. Issei now wielded his power, and now he wielded Issei's power as well? He didn't want to obtain power, especially not like this. He fought with his own power, no one else's. Above the skies of Mount Olympus, a silhouette swooped down towards Issei and Valley. It was a young man dressed in Chinese armor, holding a black-brown staff. "Yo, Valley." Gritting his teeth at Issei, who appeared to be surprised at the unexpected arrival of this person, Valley wiped the blood off of his mouth and turned to the young man. "Biko, what are you doing here? Can't you see I'm in the middle of something?" Biko waved his hands in defense at his friend's current attitude. Hey, calm yourself, Valley. I made a long journey to come get you. You should be at least grateful. The other guys were making a fuss at headquarters, you know? We're joining together to fight the northern country gods. You were supposed to flee and return right away if the mission failed, right? Katlia failed to assassinate Michael, Azazel, and Lucifer, right? In that case, your observation role is also over. So cheer up and come back with me. Glaring at his friend for a moment, Valley sent his narrowed eyes towards Issei, who set his eyes into a serious glare in response. This is not over, Welsh Dragon. Not by a long shot. Issei narrowed his eyes. Whoever said it was Valley? A black pool of darkness spread over the ground and seized Valley and Biko. Biko turned towards Issei and smiled. "It's nice to meet you, Welsh Dragon," Biko said as he casually greeted Issei. Issei nodded quietly in response. As he watched his rival and Biko disappear from the training ground of Mount Olympus, Issei narrowed his eyes as he noticed Valley glowering darkly at him. Feeling the breeze of the training ground of Mount Olympus, Issei's eyes started to grow heavy, before he collapsed onto the ground in complete exhaustion. Hospital of the Citri clan, in the underworld. Beep beep beep. Brown eyes strained themselves, and they opened wide to see an all-white area. Squinting his eyes at the bright light, Issei attempted to get up, before realizing he was in a hospital bed. His eyes widening, Issei looked to see that he had wires on his arms. He was in a hospital. As he sensed the numerous amount of devils, he deduced that he was now in the underworld. But how? The last place he had been to before falling unconscious was at the training ground of Mount Olympus. Blinking several times in confusion, Issei laid back onto the hospital bed, choosing to rest, and then find out what was going on. The doors of his hospital room opened, and a figure walked in. Had Issei had his eyes opened, he would have recognized the person immediately. It was a young woman with long knee-length black hair and light brown eyes covered by blue, semi-rimmed glasses with square lenses. Issei, sensing a familiar presence, opened his eyes to see a long-haired girl wearing blue glasses with square lenses, with her arms crossed. She was dressed in a nurse's outfit, with a white hat which had a pink heart symbol on it. Squinting his eyes in order to clear out the brightness in his sight, Issei widened his eyes at the sight of the familiar girl, who was looking down at him with her familiar serious expression. Tsubaki-senpai. A frantic Issei Hyoudou hurriedly ran all the way to the Citri hospital. It was all thanks to Azazel that Issei had gained knowledge on the circumstances concerning her son. Walking inside the hospital, Issei narrowed her eyes as she tried to detect her son's energy. Her brown eyes widened. "Issei, did you get stronger again?" Issei's hospital room. "Hyoudou-kun, are you feeling all right?" Issei blinked several times in confusion at the sight of Tsubaki. Normally he wouldn't have been so distracted, but the sight of Tsubaki in a nurse's outfit was entirely shocking to him. It looked strange seeing such a serious person like Tsubaki, dressed in a nurse's outfit. Blinking again, Issei lifted his hand in an attempt to rub the back of his head, until he winced and placed his hand back down. The battle with Valley was no doubt one of his toughest fights ever. It was a shame though. The accidental exchange of their powers. It was such a disaster. A catastrophic event that was never intended to happen. Sighing softly and laying his head back on his pillow, Issei tilted his head and gave Tsubaki his familiar shy smile. "Why, I'm fine, Tsubaki-senpai." Tsubaki looked down at Issei momentarily, before sitting on top of Issei's bed. Tilting his head again, Issei lifted his head slightly to look up at Tsubaki. "Hey, Tsubaki-senpai. Is everyone back at Kuo Academy all right? The Shinra devil nodded in response and crossed her arms. Yes. Surzek-sama, Serafal-sama, and Azazel were able to reach an agreement. After gathering their subordinates in order to fix the school, the leaders of the three factions signed the Kuo Treaty. Issei blinked and tilted his head before his eyes widened. So, the devils, angels, and fallen angels, are they all allies now? Yes. The young man laid his head back on his pillow. Well, at least the three factions are all good now. I wonder how that will affect everyone else. Issei's eyes widened and he looked up at Tsubaki, who stared back at him. The young man lowered his eyes in slight melancholy. Gomenasai, Tsubaki-senpai. Tsubaki maintained her stoic expression, but she tilted her head slightly. What was Issei apologizing to her for? He didn't do anything wrong. What for? Issei looked back up, and his familiar nervousness resurfaced as he looked down again. I promised that as soon as all of the mess at Kuo Academy was over, we could go out on our date together. But I'm in the hospital now. At the mention and remembrance of Issei's promise, Tsubaki's stoic demeanor immediately dissolved, and her light brown eyes widened considerably. A luminescent blush brightened onto her cheeks, and she tightened her fists as her body began to feel warm again. She was just relieved that Issei wasn't looking up at her now. Issei looked up, and his eyes widened in confusion. He tilted his head as he lifted his finger up, pointing to Tsubaki. Hey, Tsubaki-senpai. Are you okay? Your face is all red. Do you have a cold or something? Tsubaki's eyes widened further, and her blush brightened all the way up to her face. She suddenly felt her body become even more warm and a bit hot. Darn. Hyoudou and his innocence. Grandson of Zeus. Issei and Tsubaki looked up to see Azazel with his hand on the former's hospital room door. Issei blinked in confusion at the unexpected appearance of the fallen angel. Azazel? The fallen angel chuckled in response. Humph. Glad to see you're awake, Issei. The young man blinked repeatedly in response, while Tsubaki looked over at the fallen angel. Her stoic expression immediately resurfaced, reforming into a more serious look. Azazel looked over to Tsubaki and crossed his arms. You're Sona Citri's queen. Am I right? Tsubaki narrowed her eyes. Yes. Would you mind giving Issei and I a few minutes to chat? Tsubaki widened her eyes slightly at the request, and she looked over to Issei, who looked back at her. She was hesitant in leaving Issei all by himself with Azazel. Not because she thought that the fallen angel was a threat to Issei, but because according to Rias, Azazel was a pervert. She didn't want to risk Issei's innocence. Sighing, Tsubaki lifted herself up from the hospital bed and walked out of Issei's hospital room, giving Azazel an unreadable glance, before leaving. Smiling in amusement, Azazel walked over to Issei and crossed his arms. Grandson of Zeus, how you feeling? Issei blinked again, and he sent Azazel a nod. I'm all right. A little sore, but I can manage. The fallen angel nodded in response. His power at its increased greatly, and not because of the new addition of his sacred gear. Issei looked at Azazel closely, and his eyes widened. Why that a prosthetic arm? Azazel smiled and looked at his artificial arm with pride. It's a genuine artificial arm that I produced while researching sacred gears. It's an all-purpose arm that can be loaded with light power-style laser beams and tiny missiles. I wanted to be equipped with such a thing once. I equipped it in commemoration of my lost arm. Issei tilted his head and blinked. How did you lose it? Azazel shrugged in response and maintained a cool look. During the battle at your school, I had fought a member of the old Satan faction and I had no choice but to cut off my arm to ensure my survival. It was hasty, but that I had no choice. Issei looked on in fascination as Azazel's hand flew out, performing several rotations. Pausing, Azazel sent Issei a serious look. Grandson of Zeus, the power exchange between you and Vale. Issei widened his eyes further, and Azazel's eyes gained a serious edge to them. It was catastrophic and unexpected to say the least. However, I also noticed that you didn't use each other's powers. I know the reason why Vala didn't use his newly acquired power. It's just like him, he refuses to use no one else's power but his own. But I'm a little surprised you didn't use Vala's power. Issei narrowed his eyes and looked down in thought. Vala and our power exchange wasn't intended. It was entirely accidental, and we both should have moved away at the start. He looked up at Azazel with a serious gaze. The fight between Vala and we were completely even. The force behind our blows, punches, kicks were completely the same. If I were to create the dividing gear, it would have been pointless, because Vala and I were already even to begin with. Azazel stared at Issei with an unreadable look on his face, while Issei looked down on his bed. As a sign of respect, I won't use Vala's dividing power. It wouldn't be fair. Humph. You sure are something, Issei Hyoudou. Regardless, it's beneficial to take in another dragon's power. The power you unintentionally took in should have been recorded into Draig's soul. And the same goes for Albion when Vala took in your power. Issei gained a saddened look in his eyes. Azazel's eyes softened. It is because of your heritage that you were able to stabilize the mighty power of the Welsh dragon. You've already shown the same level of mastery in Balance Breaker as Vala. Now the only thing is that if you truly wanted to, with harsh training you should be able to use the power of the divine dividing. Issei looked up at the fallen angel in surprise, and then he looked away. Issei. Both Azazel and Issei looked up to see Hiromi Hyoudou rushing inside the hospital room to hug her son tightly. Issei winced as he felt his body crushing from his mother's hold. Issei. I was so worried about you. Humph, such a overprotective mother. Hiromi ceased in hugging her son, and turned around to glare at Azazel, who wisely covered his mouth and sprinted out of the hospital room. Issei widened his eyes and didn't dare speak for Azazel's defense. He knew better than to make his mother angry. 1 week later, at Kuo Academy. Hey Issei-san. Are you feeling better? Seated in the back of his classroom, Issei looked up and widened his eyes to see Yudo Kiba walking through the classroom door. The young man blinked his brown eyes in confusion at the Knight of the Occult Research Club. Rubbing the back of his head, Issei stood up from his seat and turned to face Yudo. Why, I'm fine. Thanks for asking, Yudo-san. A week had passed, and Issei was finally feeling better. The fight with the vanishing dragon had taken a toll on him. But now that he felt better than ever before, Yudo smiled in response and looked around the classroom in amusement. Issei widened his eyes and looked around his classroom. He noticed that some of the males were whispering to each other, and some of the girls appeared to be crying with tears of jealousy. The Welsh dragon rose an eyebrow at the people in his class, and he rubbed the back of his head. Issei-san. I was sent here by Azazel-san to give you this. Issei blinked several times in confusion as Yudo handed him a small flyer. Issei looked at the flyer curiously and looked back at Yudo, who was already near the classroom door. Issei-san. Let's train later, all right? Issei was about to answer, until his reply was cancelled out by loud voices. Training? What kind of training? It's their love training. It has to be. Issei widened his eyes and looked behind him to see a huge crowd of the female student body. The young man widened his eyes further and rose an eyebrow. What are they talking about? Never mind them, partner. Let's see what the leader of the fallen angel has given you. Still a bit confused by the shouts from the girls in his class, Issei looked back at the flyer and turned it around to see a hidden message. Go the nurse's office? But why there? Kuo Academy, nurse's office. Issei opened the door and widened his eyes. When he saw that there was no one inside, blinking curiously, he looked back at the flyer and rose an eyebrow. Why did Azazel want me to go into the nurse's office? There's no one around here. Partner, look at the flyer more closely. Issei complied with the Welsh dragon's suggestion, and he widened his eyes to see another message glowing on the flyer. Place the flyer on top of one of the resting beds. Issei tilted his head, but he did as the flyer told him. Putting the flyer gently on the bed, Issei stood back, waiting to see what would happen next. Tilting his head, Issei rubbed the back of his head. So what's supposed to it? He cut himself off when a bright purplish light emitted from out of the flyer, forming into a silhouette. Issei covered his eyes in order to shield himself from the bright light. Sensing the light fading away, Issei tentatively opened his eyes, and his eyes widened as he gained a look of absolute shock and horror. Sitting on top of the bed was an extremely voluptuous beauty. She had indigo blue hair and light brown eyes, dressed in a nurse jacket and lace-trimmed thigh-highs. Issei wouldn't have been so shocked if it hadn't been for the fact that the woman's outfit was very, very revealing. For instance, the nurse jacket was open, only covering part of the woman's ample-sized BRSS. A garter belt was also noticeable on the woman's stomach, and the woman wasn't wearing any footwear. Issei backed away and covered his eyes when he noticed that there was a stethoscope that was placed between the woman's ample bosom and all the way down to her. Issei backed away again, almost tripping over some items on the floor. The young man tried to block the immodestly dressed woman out of his thoughts. The woman appeared to be in her mid-20s, so it was apparent that she was already much older than Issei. The slender figure and bountiful beard she possessed were more than enough to convince Issei that she took great care of herself. But what stood out to Issei more was just one thing that was so shocking to him. A large pair of crow-like wings jutted out from the woman's back, fluttering ever so often. Issei backed away again, making sure not to trip on anything. A fallen angel? This was what Azazel sent him? But why would the fallen angel do this to him? Issei, as far as he was concerned, was a good person. Why was this happening to him? Very interesting. The cup size looks like AK. Very impressive, Azazel. K. What are you talking about? Oh, don't mind me, partner. I was merely observing the bust line, waistline, and hips of this fallen angel in front of you. Nothing to worry about. What do you mean there's nothing to worry about? And why are you doing that anyway? Remember I told you that some of previous hosts were able to attract the opposite SEC? Yeah. Well, the fact is that some of my hosts never actually spoke to me as much as you do. So since there was nothing else to do, I studied the measurements of the women my hosts bedded with. What kind of sick dragon are you? Don't judge me, partner. Issei-sama. Issei cancelled his conversation with the Welsh dragon, and before he knew it, the female fallen angel was right in front of him. Much to Issei's horror and shock, he felt the fallen angel's enormous bust trapping him entirely. Issei flailed about as he struggled to escape the confines of the woman's large bust. Issei's mind. Drake rose his head as he watched his host being smothered by the fallen angel's assets. He chuckled in amusement as he noticed the fallen angel holding a great pleasurable gaze as she suffocated Issei with her marshmallows. So this is what marshmallow hell is. Azazel sure had a strange way of compensating Issei.